Good evening. It's 6 o'clock, so I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Manitou Springs City Council for May the 16th, 2023. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
City Council members Judith Chandler. Present. John Shada. Julie Wolf. Natalie Johnson. Here. Michelle Weatherholt. Here. Mayor Pro Tem Nancy Fortune. Present. And Mayor John Graham.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we all came to work. That's a good thing. All right, next item is approval of the agenda. And before we go further, it's my understanding that the item K1, which is an executive session, some of the technical information we would need to pursue that is not available. So the recommendation from staff is to remove that from from tonight's agenda. The plan would be to address it when we have sufficient amount of information. Is that correct, Denise? Okay, thank you. So council, I think you've all had a chance to look at the agenda. I would look for a motion to approve the agenda, and please consider the removal of the executive session.
Move to approve the agenda as printed, excluding K1.
Thank you. And we have a motion, a second. Judy, how do you want us to vote? Okay, we'll stand by. Let's vote.
7-0 in favor.
Okay, thank you. So the motion, the agenda is approved minus the executive session. Okay, next item is public comment on non-agenda items. So this would be the time when anyone in the public can comment on an item that's not on the agenda. Judy, did we receive any requests?
No, Mayor.
Okay. Apparently, no one wishes to make public comment. Okay, let's move on to the consent calendar. We've got 6 items on the consent calendar. First, approval of the May 2nd, 2023 regular meeting minutes. Second, approval of the May 9th, 2023 special meeting minutes. 3, presentation of warrants. 4th, approval of the Master Renewable Professional Services Agreement with GMS Incorporated for engineering services over the water treatment plant capital improvements projects. The 5th, resolution number 1223, a resolution ratifying the city council approval of the purchase and sale agreement and amendments thereto, and authorizing the city administrator or the mayor pro tem to take all actions and execute all documents necessary to complete the conveyance of real property with an address of 9650 Volmore Road, Colorado Springs, Colorado 80908. The 6th item, approval of Megan Day as an alternate member of the City Planning Commission. Any member of council wants to take an item off for separate consideration, we can do that. If not, I would ask for a motion to approve and accept the consent calendar.
Mayor, if I may say, we did have an adjustment made to the resolution by our attorney this afternoon. And so I did upload that to the civic clerk. So if you have access to that, it was maybe. If
Yeah, no, I can explain it. Basically, we were presented with a third amendment yesterday, I believe, which was just to make a adjustment based on the square footage of the property. So it's that needs to also be approved by city council. It's there was a 2,000 square foot discrepancy on the 100+ acres of property. So we wanted to make sure we had the exact right square footage. So the third amendment does that. And this resolution approves, it ratifies your former approvals of the contract, the first and second amendments, because we want that in writing for the title company. It approves the third amendment with the square footage adjustment, and then it authorizes Denise, the mayor, or the mayor pro tem to sign any related closing documents as needed.
Thank you for the explanation. Julie?
Does the square footage adjustment affect our percentage of the sale price?
Yes,
Weren't we at like 11%?
Yeah, well, yeah, we lose $300 out of about 880,000.
Oh.
So it's
Thank
not
you.
much.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question, though.
Okay, thanks for explaining that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I guess so we have a motion and a second for the consent calendar.
I move approval of the consent calendar.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and vote.
Seven to zero in favor.
Okay, great. Motions, the consent calendar is approved unanimously. Okay, let's get on to hearings. We have two tonight. The first is a second reading and public hearing of ordinance number 0723, an ordinance approving a lease purchase agreement with Clayton Holdings LLC. We have our finance director, Becca Davis, here to address that. We discussed this. This was last week or, yeah. Yeah, so Becca, if you want to update us on anything, that would be good.
Good evening. So Mayor is correct. This was just discussed last week at the special meeting. Nothing has changed. It's a great interest rate of 3.98%. Just need to have the public hearing and then we can move on.
Okay, council, do you have any questions for Becca at this point? Okay, in that case, we'll get on with the public hearing for the public comment portion. So I open this up to public comment for this item. Does anyone wish to speak to it? Not much controversy when you're getting a good deal. Okay, I'll close the public comment. Council, any deliberation or we look for a motion? Julie?
I move to approve on second reading the ordinance 0723.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Judith. All right, any further discussion? If not, let's vote.
Seven to zero in favor.
Okay, great. Motion passes unanimously. Next item, second public hearing on ordinance number 0423, an ordinance of the city of Manitou Springs, Colorado, amending Title 10 Vehicles and Traffic, Section 10.12.010, prohibited where, when, C of the Manitou Springs Municipal Code relating to the designation of color coding for parking restricted areas. Okay. Roy, you're gonna walk us through
Yes.
this one?
Good evening, City Council. So this is the second reading, and I do want to let you know on the ordinance that after whereas it still says the green parking areas, but actually it's going to be restricted for green. So that's being fixed now on the ordinance. Basically, I heard council a couple of weeks ago about the painting of the curbs, and we're not going to paint the curbs green. So we'll keep them as is, natural color for parking, but the green will be for restricted parking such as 15-minute, 30-minute parking zones like in front of the post office, for example. And then the yellow will be for loading zones and other restricted parking such as no parking, which is a lot more typical in cities, even though there are differences in some cities. That is one of the controversies on trying to get them to be the same. But the yellow zone itself is normally for loading and other restricted no parking type zones. So that would be listed on the curb if we did put a different restriction on those. But no plans to paint any green curbs downtown or anywhere else and use that money for something else. So I heard everyone. Thank you. So I'm asking for council to approve that on a second reading.
Okay, thank you. And Julie, you have a question or comment?
I do. I have a question. Are we only going to be painting yellow where it's already yellow?
Correct, unless something comes up that we need to. Otherwise, we're going to stay with what we have out there that makes sense, blues, the red fire zone or the yellows. But if something, if we find an area that needs to be like a fire zone or then we'll look at those areas. But
What's the blues and the red?
blue is ADA, red is fire zone, fire park, no parking because of fire access.
Do we
So
already have blue and red?
We do.
on our-
we do.
So
All
we're
that's the same.
So this is just an ordinance to authorize you to keep repainting whenever the paint needs repainting?
No, the green had loading area, which is not common to have green as a loading area. So we're just moving the loading area to yellow. And green is just for, so when someone sees green, they know they have like a 15-minute parking zone or a 30-minute parking
How
zone.
is this different from what we have now, I guess is what I'm trying to figure out.
The green is loading and restricted to time limits for parking for longer periods of time. Loading tends to be, there's a little bit of difference when they see a green, then, for example, the post office. You can park there, go inside, 15 minutes, do your business at the post office and leave. But a yellow area is really just for loading. And that could be loading people off, but then you're normally looking at 5 minutes, a few minutes. The person has to stay with the car or the vehicle and they have to leave the zone. Or it's no parking. So it depends on what you list on a yellow.
I just want to know, I'm not making myself clear, I'm sorry. Are there any parking spots or spaces on the street that are going to have a color that do not currently have a color? Let's put it that way.
None anticipated at this time.
Okay, so nothing is changing other than you're going to repaint?
No, we're changing what
change
the
some of the
colors mean a
colors.
little bit. Yes, that's all, what the colors mean, but nothing's
Oh.
changing otherwise. We're
Okay.
not going to paint anything except what's currently out there.
Okay,
Like yellows we'll make them a nice yellow again, or the blues or the reds, but no plans to go out and do a bunch of painting except in new areas. But we will clean up current painted areas.
we're going to have new painted areas?
No,
Except for new areas?
we're just going to paint the current faded painted areas that need to be painted, whether it's red for fire, yellow,
But no new areas?
no new areas planned.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's okay. Good
Um,
question.
Council will have a public comment period, but if there's any questions you have at this moment, Judith?
Thank you. Well, you've addressed the one whereas statement, so I appreciate that. I picked up on that. But so we're just really talking about yellow and green at this
Correct.
point.
That's all we're talking about today.
And my civic clerk didn't work this weekend, so I used the city government, the packet. And so I'm on page 170, 172. So I actually felt a little bit more confused because in our current code, we have yellow as loading zones.
No,
I'm sorry, we have yellow as restricted parking.
Yellow currently is no parking.
Okay.
And
And
that means no loading or anything.
so all we're really doing is keeping green restricted parking,
Yes.
and we're adding loading zones to yellow. Is that
Yes.
my understanding?
Green had loading zones.
Correct.
So we're
And
just moving
taking that
loading zones
off.
to yellow.
Okay.
That's it.
So then loading zones will be, yellow will be loading zones and other restricted parking, but you still have green as restricted parking.
Correct, which
So
is,
I'm a little
yes.
confused on what do you mean by restricted parking is yellow and green?
typically, yes, typical. And we could say, we could phrase it something else, like we could say, I actually was looking at that and it is pretty confusing in other communities. So it could be that green could be short-term parking, for example. We could change it to that name, which would be listed on the curb. So if you look at the post office, there's a green section and I believe it says 15-minute parking. So the green is just for that. So there's no confusion that it's not a loading zone. You can park there. You can go do a little bit of shopping, whatever, in the post office, get your stamps, and then you have to move in 15 minutes. There's no price, no charge. But if you're going to load, then you would look for a yellow curb to load, which we would generally put on there the time limit. If there's no time limit, it's generally considered a no parking zone, but you could drop someone off quickly for 5 or less minutes, drop off some pedestrians or some people who want to go shop, and then you park elsewhere.
So currently green is really only short-term parking, right? That really encompasses what green is in its totality.
Right
is
now,
short-
green is also loading
Right, but in
or
this,
drop off loading.
in this new, in what we're talking about changing, green would become only short-term parking and yellow would be loading zones and other restricted parking.
Correct.
So I would move to approve on second reading and public hearing. We haven't had a public hearing.
We haven't had the public comment yet,
Never mind.
but
I'll wait.
okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Before we open public comment, anything else council members have? Okay, let's go ahead with, Nancy?
Just a quick question. Can you change the painting within the 5 days before this ordinance takes effect?
Yeah, if there's, so the only thing we're doing, because there's not really much green out there. It's actually being used probably the way we're just trying to make it read because we don't have a lot of green. There's like one on Cannon. But yes, we could easily, there's not that many spots. We can take care of the yellow, that one yellow area on Cannon. And then the loading zone in downtown is in the center aisle. So there's really very few spots at this point, but there is one on Cannon that is green loading, but then also becomes a parking area. So for example, I get a lot of complaints from the businesses that people are parking there thinking green is for, I can park there for a short period of time. And then commercial trucks can't drop off supplies to the businesses. So yellow has always been considered, either no parking or I can stop there and load and unload and then it's signed so people understand how that works. But again, the only other green would be the post office at this point. And there may be a couple other little areas, but we'll check those out and we'll make adjustments if needed, but it's not a lot.
I'd like to go ahead and open the public comment portion of this meeting then, or this hearing. So if there's anyone in the public who'd like to speak to this is the time to do it. This isn't terribly controversial, so I'm not surprised. Going once, going twice, 3 times. Public comments closed. Council, any additional questions or comments? Judith.
I would move to approve on second reading and public hearing ordinance number 0423 with a change from A, yellow being loading zones and restricted parking areas, and C, green being short-term parking. And my rationale is restricted parking is listed twice. It's under yellow and green, and I find that very confusing.
Okay, sounds good.
Yes. Okay, so just so I can understand, I think most of us are looking at the ordinance. Item A, the loading zones and other restricted areas. Where it's area, actually, I'm sorry, would you state that again, please?
Yes. I would move to approve on second reading and public hearing ordinance number 0423 with the following change. A, loading zones and other restricted parking areas are yellow, and C, green is short-term parking, which is what it currently is. That way, restricted parking isn't listed twice under 2 different colors.
Okay, yeah, I see your point there. I think it would still be valuable to leave that comment in there. No parking unless posted would be valuable to have. Did you? I'm sorry. Is it your intent on item A to include keep in that the phrase there parentheses no parking unless posted parentheses? I'm sorry. Do you have the ordinance in front of you? Judith, your microphone isn't on.
I would suggest that if the yellow zone's not posted, that we keep it as a known parking area, so we don't get folks parking there otherwise, so.
So to answer your question, I would keep that no parking unless posted, but I would still make green short-term parking because
Yes,
it's not restricted parking. Yellow is restricted parking. Does that
Correct.
answer your question, Mayor and Council?
Yeah, I think it does. It's a question of what we mean by restricted. You made that a motion?
I did make a motion. It would need
Okay.
a second.
We have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion is second. Okay, so the motion is to approve the ordinance as presented with the modification under section 1, item A. Make sure I get this right here, Judith. Loading zones and other restricted areas. This includes no parking unless posted. That would be yellow. And then C, restricted parking would be changed to short-term parking, and that would be green.
Correct.
Okay, so that's the motion, and we have the second. Any further discussion? Okay, let's vote.
Seven to zero in favor.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank
Super.
you.
Okay, well, I guess it's time to get the paint out, right? Okay. Summer's almost here. It'd be good to have those curbs looking clean and neat. Okay, that takes us to business. First item of business tonight is discussion of Pikes Peak Regional Transportation Authority membership and allocations. Denise, I think you're gonna help us through with that with Rick Sonnenberg from PPRTA.
Good evening. Yes, and I have asked Rick to join me. He oversees the PPRTA and knows it inside and out. So I asked him to be up here to join to be able to answer any questions. I'd like to take a moment and talk about how we got to where we are today. When we went to look at, when you were asked to bring Calhan on as a party, I was asked by one of you, do we get more than we give to the PPRTA, or do we get less? So does our sales tax, we contribute more to the PPRTA, or do we contribute less? And I said, oh, I think we get more. But I sent it to Becca, and Becca says, oh, I think I got more. But I said, this is assumptions. These are not facts. So we went ahead and started doing some analysis. We did the first 4 years, and it appeared that we were giving more than what we were getting back. And I said, let's take a step back and let's look at all the years, because the last 4 years, we all know sales tax has been pretty high. And so we wanted a bigger picture. And that has taken some time, because that is not how PPRTA looks at this. They look at it from a regional perspective. And that's how this was approved, was from a regional perspective. So we've been going back and forth and looking at numbers with the PPRTA. And those are the numbers that I have given to you and that was in the packet. However, there was a change that Rick called me today on, or yesterday, and said we forgot to take out the 10% transit. So therefore I made that change. I sent that to you, and you have the new numbers there in front of you with the spreadsheet, and we have extra if anybody wants it. So that's how we got to where we are today. So let me go through the presentation, and then we would love to have questions or concerns or discussion. I'd like to thank Rick and Lisa, both from the PPRTA. They have been very helpful as we look at this. Rick, I will tell you, knows the amendments inside and out. I would ask a question and he would go 7.1.2 and be able to answer anything. So they have been very helpful as we've done some of these analysis. Next slide, please. Let me just give a little background on the PPRTA and the elections and how they occurred. And we started out with 2004. I'm not going to read this word for word. You also have my presentation in front of you, so you can review it as we go forward. But you will see that the PPRTA is a regional ballot initiative, and it has passed every single year. Next slide. And the reasons that we believe it passes, or that PPRTA believes, is of course the traffic congestion is a concern for everybody. How the funds are distributed, and then the sunset provision. So it's 10 years, and then we come back and we take it to the voters again and ask if they would like to approve another PPRTA. And it usually has very specific projects. However, as you remember, because you approved the 2025 project list, ours are not as specific this time, and we did that on purpose, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then it also has transit funding and road conditions. Next slide. So when this started, there was a formation of an intergovernmental agreement. You have the 5th agreement in your packet, which is the one that we fall under now. It outlines the terms, and then it talks about Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments as the administration of this. And that was because they're a neutral party, Tabor benefits, and it allows a public process. Membership at the beginning was City of Coral Springs, El Paso County, City of Manitou Springs, and then the town of Green Mountain Falls. Rama joined in 2009, And then you approved Callahan to join in 2022. And Fountain may request to join in 2024 with the election of 2023. The PPRTA structure is 55% of the revenue goes to capital projects. And those projects are listed on the ballot very specifically of what we can use those for. And again, I'll talk about ours in a moment. The board decides how these funds are allocated. And in the past, they've been allocated by population. However, the board can decide to do that differently. And our mayor sits on the PPRTA board. 35% of the revenue is for maintenance, and that is based on population. 10% of the revenue goes to transit, and then there's a 10-member board of directors, 3 from the city of Colorado Springs, 3 from El Paso County, and then 1 from each other member government. And that was part of the 5th Amendment, which you also approved when it was brought to you. That means that 1/3 of the votes are for county, 1/3 of the votes Colorado Springs, and the other 1/3 of the votes come from the member governments. There's a 17-member Citizens Advisory Committee, and both Ann Nichols and Ellen Delwich sits on that committee. IGA amendments, I'm not going to read this word for word, but it just talks about what each of those amendments were and what was done at each one of those and when they were done. So the distribution of funds, I've already brought that to your attention, that the maintenance funds are allocated by population. Manitou Springs will not be growing a lot, right? We may get 100 or 200 people, but we're not going to get a big growth. We're landlocked. So we do not see a large growth happening. The population will not change again until 2030 when the census is taken, or if another municipality joins. Capital funds are at the discretion of the board. And as I mentioned before, their standard practice has been distribution by population, but that is a board discretion and probably something that the board will be looking at in the future. And this is an opportunity for discussion. 2015 and 2024 projects for Manitou Springs were listed here. The West End project and the drainage improvements, which has been completed. Manitou Springs downtown sidewalk drainage and utilities improvement, which is always ongoing. And then the transit shuttle or surface structure parking, which is Hiawatha Gardens. And we've been working on that continuously. This is the 2025 and 2034 projects, which you approved to put on the ballot. And I remember when we had this discussion, which was we did not want it to be very specific, because as a small municipality, that can really limit what we can and cannot do. So it's Manitou Avenue safety and mobility improvements, Manitou Streets system safety and mobility improvements citywide. That really allows us to have a lot of flexibility. And I would say the 2025 project that we will probably be looking at or bringing to you is going to be Serpentine. We know that that needs a lot of work. The bridge needs a lot of work, and 2025 will probably be a design phase for that project. Next slide. So as we looked at this, I laid out some options, and there may be other options, but this is for discussion. And I tried to go through the pros and cons. So we'll just go through, we can vote to accept Fountain if they decide that they want to do that and they ask for such a vote, and with no allocation changes. I do want to mention that this must be approved by 6 member government governing bodies by majority vote of each and every one of them. So if one of the governing bodies said no, then Fountain would not be able to join. So all 6 must approve by majority vote. Pros, it continues regional partnership, and it looks at transportation and mobility from a regional perspective. Also, sustainability and air quality is a regional issue. Cons, it impacts Manitou Springs funding for a total of about $18,739 a year in the negative. It does not address the population concern. However, again, the population concern, our census will be taken in 2030. And it reduces Manitou Springs' vote on the board. And I don't know if you remember last time that was a concern about CAC. Do we still keep 2 members on our CAC if Calhan came on? And we were able to keep those. So it does dilute Manitou Springs' vote. Option number 2 is to request the PPRTA board to allocate additional capital funds to Manitou Springs to make up the difference that we have done over the last couple of years. Pros is possibility of receiving additional funds 2023 and 2024, and we could definitely use those funds for the Hiawatha project to get that over the hump and really get that finished. Cons, it does not address maintenance fund allocation by population. But again, I think that this could change with the 2025 with the project list of A and B, and that would be a discussion at the board meeting at the PPRTA board. Option number 3 is provide direction to the mayor to request PPRTA board to revisit the 5th amended and restricted IGA, in particular maintenance and fund allocation. Pros, it could provide additional funding to Manitou Springs. It could. Cons, it would take time and it may prevent Fountain from joining in 2024. And options 4 is pass a resolution to exit PPRTA. Possibility of local control of all funds collected. If the ballot initiative was passed, it would have to go to our voters and they would have to approve a ballot initiative for the funds for 1 cent sales tax to go towards our projects only. The cons for that is removed from regional discussion and solutions and no guarantee that the local initiative would pass. Also, PPRTA board would need to vote to exclude Manitou Springs region by 2/3 vote, or they would go ahead and continue to get that funding. Need to identify how it affects our 2023 funding. And it would not have the opportunity to borrow for other projects. And I think as you saw by the spreadsheet, we borrowed at the beginning $2 million and we pay that off and we do it without interest. So you really work collaborative. I see that that's going to happen with Serpentine because we're not going to have all the money up front. And we're going to go and say, can we get some additional funding up front so we can move this project forward? And then we would pay it back over time. So conclusion, I would say regional partnerships continue to hold extreme importance. I think you hear that from Chief Forsett, Chief Otto. I can give an example of when COVID hit and I had numerous people out in the water department and was worried about a water main break. And I was able to call Scott Trainer and I said, Scott, if we have a break, can you send people over? And he said, of course. So the regional partnerships continue to happen. And it also is important to be at the table for those discussions. PPRTA does allow one member to borrow from another in order to complete a project. And I mentioned that, and that's interest-free. And I think all of you know what the interest rates are at this point. There's no guarantee of future funding if we pull out of the PPRTA. And Manitou sales tax could change over the next several years, and we may be a net receiver instead of a net giving funds. We don't know that, but we do see that there are 2 stores that are definitely changing a little bit, and we know that that's happening in the entire state and the entire nation. And transportation and sustainability are regional concerns. With that, we will open it up for questions or comments, and Rick is probably going to be able to answer most of those.
Okay, and council, I would remind you too, if you have questions, not only do we have Rick and Denise, but we've got Alan and Ann here who serve on the Citizens Advisory Committee, and they are intimately aware of a lot of the mechanics that go in behind what's obvious. Our city engineer, Dole Grabinick, also serves on, I believe it's the Transportation Advisory Committee. So we have a wealth of people to ask questions of. So if you have questions, this is it. Julie.
So since we became partners or part of the PPRTA, how much have we given them in sales tax And how much have they given back to us?
It's on the spreadsheet that you just received. So it's a total of $14,395 and $701.
That's how much we paid or that's how much we received?
That's how much they've received in the,
14 million?
yeah.
And how much did we receive back?
We've received $12,464,214.
So we've lost $2 million by this deal
Well,
so far?
over 18 years.
Yeah.
And there's also,
My God,
there
Well, if
is
my
the
investment in-
transit,
go
the
ahead.
transit is also, we've included transit funding. And so that came to really $12,956 and 131 cents, because 10% of everything we collect goes to transit.
So we've lost over $1 million by this great deal.
I don't
I'm glad
know.
they're not my retirement investment advisor. That looks like a horrible deal. So we're going to keep doing it because we like partnerships? That's scary.
I don't know if it's partnerships. I would say that there's other parts of what PPRTA has contributed that impacts our residents. So for instance, Cimarron Exchange is our residents travel that. It's a safety, it's a regional transportation. It does not, and those funds go to those type of things to help with the regional transportation. We have residents that may travel it places for meetings or for doctor's appointments or those type of things. So when you look at PPRTA, it's a regional perspective, and that is something for you as elected officials to decide if that's what you want to continue with or not.
I think Natalie had her hand up first and then
Sure. I just have a quick
John.
one. Is this time sensitive? What's the timeline in terms of fountains inclusion? What do we need to decide tonight, I suppose, is my
Rick,
question.
can you speak to the timeline a little bit?
Good evening, Mayor Graham, council members. The city of Fountain has spent most of the year since January looking seriously at whether or not to join the PPRTA. They have had citizen meetings, staff meetings, meetings with us, as well as they've hired a consultant to do scientific random sampling of their citizenry to see if the citizens are interested in joining. And that's been a positive response. The timing is they're on a certain deadline to execute the steps with the El Paso County Clerk and Recorder to get on the ballot for November. And as you're probably well aware, that goes backwards X number of days from November for various steps, including a letter of intent, followed by an IGA with the Clerk and Recorder's office, and then pay 50% down on the estimated expense of the ballot. So they need to decide something probably in August. So the timeline right now is if they are still serious, then they will most likely go to the staff, go to their council. The council approve a resolution. For the first step in the series of dominoes is they approve a resolution expressing their intent to join, which potentially would be May 23. They would present that to the board, the PPRTA board, on June 14. Then the required step is to refer out starting on June 15 and give the 6-member governments roughly 45 days to August 1st, 2nd, or 3rd to have that 45 days for the 6-member governments, governing bodies to give the fountains joining a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So did I answer your question?
Nancy and then Judith.
Not, let's see, addressing this from purely Manitou self-interest. Our discussion tonight doesn't really need to revolve around Fountain. Because they could join next year, correct? Or they could ask to join next year.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm, no offense to Fountain, but I'm not feeling a lot of pressure from that particular timeline. I would also say that I would hate to see that the value of the PPRTA and our membership in it is assessed just by dollars and cents. Because I think there's tremendous value that we and our residents get from all the projects or most of the projects that PPRTA undertakes. That being said, I think we just found out that this discrepancy, if we just look at the dollars and cents, and I would like to not rush into anything, because our citizens have voted year after time in favor of PPRTA. And if one entity were to pull out, I think that the possibility of causing chaos in an organization that does a tremendous amount of, in my opinion, good work within the region would be, and the organization would be put at risk by that. So I don't want to rush into any decisions. I would like to continue assessing what's happening. I would like to seriously look at seeing if there's a possibility of more capital funds in the near term. But I think that we have to very carefully consider our way forward on this and not rush into anything.
Thank you. Judith?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I have to express that I get a little bit of heartburn when we have a packet that goes out to the community that has information in it, and then council receives updated information with significant alterations that the public is not privy to. And so that to me is not a democratic process. And therefore, just from that standpoint alone, I would like to defer this discussion to a work session where the community has full access to the actual numbers, which I think is very important. We represent the people and we have information that the community doesn't have, and that is not acceptable to me. Second of all, while I do appreciate very much the regional partnerships, I do not want to get in a situation where we as a community say, well, you know, this is how it's always been done. We've always done it this way. Let's not change anything. I think it's really a good opportunity for us to have a work session where we look at what are the pros of staying with the PPRTA? What are the cons? One of my concerns with the PPRTA is that only 10% of funds are devoted to transit. And I think that that is a model that I think is not congruent with today's sustainability models in communities. And so because I represent Manitou, my first goal is to say, you know, does this continue to serve Manitou? What is the bigger picture? What can we do otherwise with the funds? And is this a model that still works for us, or is it a little antiquated? And with other communities wanting to join, does that dilute the amount of influence and power that we have over making decisions? On the face of it, just looking at the numbers, it doesn't look like a great investment. However, I want to see the bigger picture. So that's what I would recommend, is in the future that we have a work session devoted to this, where the community has access to the current numbers, and we take a look at the entire model and really delve into whether this is a really sustainable model for Manitou. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. John, I believe you're next.
I'll ask about those two.
I was looking at the PPRTA packet and budget. And I just wanted to ask for clarification in terms of whether that 701 versus 501 is a typographical error, because Denise had documented in our spreadsheets that Mantu's capital allocation was 501,281. And in
John, could you be a little more specific there so we can follow along?
capital allocation under 2023.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, but they have something in their documents in which is that is $200,000 more. So I was just wanting some clarification on which one of those numbers. I realized that Denise's numbers are more conservative than what's in their budget. And by the way, both those sheets of paper are printed from the PDF that I wrote across the top. I didn't want to print. My printer at home was a little complaining about low ink, so I had to kind of pick and choose which pages I printed.
$200,000 repayment. The difference appears to be the $200,000 annual repayment of the loan that Manitou Springs borrowed for the West Colorado Avenue project.
Okay, so that just wasn't footnoted somehow or another in there?
Correct.
All right. The other thing too, that then in consideration, so that so if that number should be 501, is that correct?
Well, the gross is 701, but after the $200,000 transfer repayment to the county for the West Colorado Avenue, the net is the 501.
Okay. So I ran sort of kind of a running balance of what's going on. So basically, since 2021, essentially Manitou's kind of been upside down in terms of on what's been going on here. So basically, we're almost about $1 million difference between whether if we would just essentially retain the funds and do these projects ourselves, okay, as opposed to just staying in it. Is it logical to assume that possibly this trend that I have graphed out is going to become even larger?
I don't think it will become larger because we are seeing a downtick in the two stores. And that's where the majority of our sales tax is coming from. So we're seeing a little bit of a downtick there. Unless if there was some other allocations that the PPRTA decided to do, the board.
So basically, this gap has been galloping along here at about $300,000, okay, from 2021 to 2022, and nearly $500,000. So my concern is $500,000. That's not even our paving budget, folks. Okay. So I can understand all this regional kind of kumbaya business. Okay. But the reality of it is our streets need paving here. Okay. And other things are getting done. And that's great. The other thing I want to also talk about in terms of this ballot issue, I went and looked at the ballot issue. There was not one number on that ballot, okay, issue that talked about funding in terms of what Manitou was voting for, okay? It had a long laundry list of names of projects, okay, which is great. And you can even, and in fact, when you go out and look at the abstract of the results, okay, because this was such a long ballot item, I noticed that up in the state website, they kind of chop it off and go do the length of the ballot title and whatnot. We can't even show you it all. So I had to go out and look at the list. Okay. Fortunately, there was sort of kind of a scanned PDF of the resolution that PPRTA used to initiate the ballot. Okay. That we could see. So I guess I want to underscore that I think to our residents, they don't have this information. that we're essentially upside down for 3 years on this to the tune of $1 million. Okay. So to basically say that our voters voted for something last November, we didn't even have this information. Okay. There weren't even alternatives kind of put out there. Okay. So I guess I want to clarify that all. And if I said anything that is incorrect, please somebody raise their hand and put their hand up and say that a number I said or some conclusion I said was inappropriate. Thank you.
If
I
I
could-
might, Mayor.
Go ahead, Rick. Yeah.
Numbers are reviewed, presented by each of the member governments to the citizen committee and the board. They just don't make it onto the ballot. It's in the board's practice since 2004, and then again in 2012, again in 2022, not to put dollar figures next to each capital project on the ballot. That's just been their practice. But there is extensive discussion and presentations by each of the member governments to the CAC and the board of the dollar figures next to each project.
If I could, Rick, I'll let you finish and I'd like to add on, follow your comments. Did you have more?
I'm done.
Okay. So really, PPRDA, one of the things you'll notice about the ballot and the way the whole mechanism works, there's an A list and a B list. The A list are projects that are identified as they're going to get done in this next 10-year period. Those are high priority. And we believe we can get them done. And, there'll be a guesstimate as to the price. Remember, this is a 10-year scope. So, what something's going to cost today's estimates, we can only extrapolate. And we're constantly hearing from CDOT that the cost of asphalt and concrete are going up. So it's always kind of a sad story. So there's kind of a buffer in there. And then there's the B list items, which are, these are projects we'll get to when time and money allows. So A list, there's a strong commitment to get that done within the 10-year period and within the money that we've got. And the B list, we'll try to tackle as much of that as we can. It's prioritized. So that's kind of how the philosophy goes. And so what something actually is going to cost is sort of it's a moving target. And I guess in my mind, and I'm still a little bit traumatized, I think, by some things that happened on West Manitou Avenue. It took longer, whatnot. And we went back for money. And I think it was PPRTA that we went to. Correct me if I'm wrong. So PPRTA was helpful in that sense. We had to reach back for continuing funding. So that would be how that works. Is it magic? Not really, but it's over a 10-year scope. It's a difficult thing to guess what costs are actually going to be.
Mayor, I would like to just do a couple of quick numbers because you are correct, Mr. Shada, on your numbers. And then we went, so if we look overall, we've collected about $14,395,701 since 2022 to 2005. If you take the 10% that goes out of transit, it's $956,131. And we've been allocated $12,464,214 to date. So the transit, taking that out really made a difference. And you are right. We did make a change that we sent out to council that will be uploaded for this packet. But yeah, as I mentioned on this, and I put on here working document, I really didn't even want to put this on when we uploaded it in the packet, knowing that we're still working on some of these numbers and they caught the transit. So thank you for, and I understand your concern. So the difference is right now, $491,917. And as you see at the beginning, we got the 2 million and some others. So I just want to show the big picture of that. And Mr. Shader, you're right. Since 2018, we've definitely seen a pretty big uptick in what we've collected in our sales tax.
Question if I could follow on the question Mr. Shada asked a few minutes ago about, well, on the sheet we've got here under the year 2000 or the 2023 capital allocation, 501,000 and change. And of course, the other number was 701. So the difference was the $200,000 that we owe the county. We've been paying that off. So I guess one way of looking at it is we got $701 from PPRTA, but we owed 200,000 of that to the county. So I guess that's something you need to look at too. And Denise, do you remember how long we've been doing that? It's been a few years. The 200,000 annual payment.
From memory, I think it's been 3 years before 2023 and with the 200,000 from 2023 and 200,000 for 2024, that'll make the repayment complete.
Okay, and that was for the West Colorado Avenue project?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So I guess in a way it looks like a social security check where they take out your insurance before you get the money. So in a sense, you get more money than actually comes to your bank account, but you get something for that. So I guess that's something we should take a look at too. Other council questions? Okay, well, so in slide presentation, there's several options. I guess my thought would be option 2 makes sense to me because in part, I think it's the simplest approach. Option 2 is to request the board to allocate additional capital funds to Manatee Springs to make up the difference. There's no guarantee that would happen. It doesn't require that we would change the IGA or have a vote or a special election. That would, I mean, if we were to get some additional capital funds, certainly we could do some things. Denise had targeted, she was suggesting Hiawatha Gardens getting, I think, some improvements out of the lot. Do you want to speak to that, Denise?
Mayor, I just wanted to ask, I don't know if you want Ann Nichols and Alan to state anything since they serve on the CAC, and I did not know if you wanted to do that.
Okay, council, there are representatives. It might not hurt to hear what they've got to say.
Mayor, I have a quick question, if
Sure.
I could interrupt. I don't have access to Civil Clerk on this computer, and I'm having trouble on the documents page of the city website to find these options. Can you tell me, does anybody know what page it is on the?
It's on the PowerPoint that I just
Oh, so
handed
it's
out
not
to you.
in
It is in the memo, but it's also on the PowerPoint. So it was part of the memo and the PowerPoint.
So it's not in my pack?
It's in your packet, but it's also on the PowerPoint that I handed to you.
And it starts on this in the city packet, page 176, 177.
But if you want to look at the handout, the options are on, well, pages 11, 12, 13 and 14. In option 2 that I had just referenced, that's item 12 on the handout, or it's page 12. Slide 12.
I have questions about the options. May I?
Okay,
ask?
go ahead.
I wasn't sure what it meant in option 1, the words with no allocation changes. Can you elaborate on that?
That was if the PPRTA board did not make any changes to their allocation.
I don't know what that means.
If they keep the capital and the maintenance as is.
So it means if option 1 means if we vote to accept Fountain, then they get 0% of the money and we still have the same allocation. So there are no allocation changes and they get 0 and we get the same amount as usual. I can't imagine that's what it means. How could that be?
I believe correct me if I'm wrong on this, Rick, but the allocations now are based on population. And we've got 2 slightly different rules for okay, so out of all this money, 10% goes to transit, 55% goes to capital projects, 35% to maintenance. What we get on maintenance, what any of the jurisdictions get for the maintenance is based on population. So for us, our population is about 0.7%. It's not a huge number. You can kind of imagine that.
So does this mean then option 1 means that we would still get the same allocation as to the maintenance part? But how can it not affect
Okay.
the allocation as to capital?
Okay. So on the capital, I think traditionally and maybe kind of a matter of habit, the capital has largely been done also based on population. It doesn't have to be done that way. It's just that I guess over the years, that kind of got to be the rhythm for how it was done, the practice. That could change. Rick, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
That's correct, Mayor. The intergovernmental agreement between the 6 member governments specifies that the maintenance percentages to each of the 6 member governments, the allocations are by population using the most recent federal census. So we're currently using the 2020 federal census. That IGA also says that the capital funds distribution allocations are by board decision. That was not by population in the first 10 years of the capital program, but the board decided for the second 10 years of the capital program, starting in 2015, that it would be by population. That's board practice. So that's why changing the capital distribution, the capital allocation is more flexible than having to change the intergovernmental agreement, which requires a 2/3 minimum vote of each and every one of the member governments to make any change to the intergovernmental agreement. Did I answer the question?
Did that help, Julie?
Well, that was, so the capital funds are by population, so you haven't extrapolated how that affects the Fountain decision. So I'll guess, and you tell me that I'm wrong, and maybe you can clarify. The capital funds by population statement, that means if we add more cities with more population, then our population number is a smaller percentage? Or I don't understand. I want you to explain to me how the adding Fountain is going to result in no allocation changes to capital funds. I realize it's completely discretionary. They could decide to give us 0, but how would it be anticipated that adding Fountain, how will that affect our efforts to get capital funds? Because apparently so far our efforts have been pretty ineffective. I mean, that we lost over $1 million. So I want to know how would this decision affect the capital funding?
So 2 things. I don't think that tonight is about adding or not adding Fountain. We don't even know if they want to come and join. So let me take that out of the equation. The maintenance is by population. And as I stated in my presentation, if Fountain was to join, which you guys will discuss at a later date, if they choose to move forward, would affect us by about 18,000 a year in the negative. And that's due to the population. Capital, I would say, you made a statement that we have not been effective in capital. And I don't know if that's an accurate statement. I think we've been very effective in partnership and getting money up front. That's interest-free, like $2 million upfront to be able to start a project. But the board has been looking at this from a population perspective, and they started that in about 2015. But the IGA does not require that. And so I think this is something that the PPRTA board will definitely be looking at and revisiting, because I think they did it because that's the way it's always been done. But due to these questions that we've asked, I think they're going to go back. I hope that they're going to go back and revisit how they might allocate capital funding.
May I comment on that?
Sure.
So the fact that we can borrow money interest-free in exchange for losing $1,047,000, I kind of doubt we'd end up having to pay $1,047,000 in interest if we had actually borrowed those funds. So that particular rationale isn't logical in my mind. The population approach to funding since 2015 we've done worse since 2015 than we did before. So I don't see how that's such a positive thing that we should be optimistic about, because things have gone south for us since then. So I don't know why you think that's a sign of optimism. I must be missing something though. Can you help me understand it?
Borrowing money is for projects, as I mentioned, Serpentine, and this is for you to consider and debate. But I would say if we want to get Serpentine done, if that's a project that you want to do, we are not going to have that money for another 10 years if we don't have the PPRTA to go and ask them to loan us the money to get started. And so that means if we go out and we borrow or we go for bonds, we have to go to the voters to approve that. This allows us to start projects without doing that. And that can be a positive or a negative, depending on how you as elected officials see it. I do want to mention overall, and you are correct, you and Mr. Shada both mentioned that in the last, since 2019, 2021, and 22, we have been substantially overfunding and been giving to the pot. We've been contributing, right? But overall, since 2005, there's only a $491,000 difference in what we've contributed and what we've received. So if you look at it long-term, there is a difference than what we've looked at. And since you're correct, like I said, 2019, 2021, and 22, we have definitely made a huge contribution.
Oh,
I think it's Mr. Shada's turn.
I see Becca over there. I filled in my sheet in terms of what our anticipated revenues might be. Would you say that our anticipated revenues would be at least as much as they were in 2022?
Can you come up and speak? So it's
No.
I mean, give me like, are we like,
Point, I'm going to say they're going to be a little less.
okay. So meaning a little less like 1.4 million?
Right now, I've got the budget with it being 1% less. It might be more like 5% less.
5% less. Okay. All right. All right. So what I did was and I can put Becca's numbers in real quick, but when I filled out through 2023, since PPRTA and we got straightened out the 501 versus the 701, okay, in there, I showed that basically we're galloping along here, okay, in the last 3 years, okay, of being south $166,000. The next year it's doubled, okay, and the next year after that it added that amount plus 50%. So essentially where we'll end up at the end of this year in 2023 is we'll be essentially $1 million south. And so I'm sort of kind of along the lines of Julie, which is that it's like, you know, I'm not here to advocate for projects that are outside the city limits here. My sworn duty is to basically, you know, see that my community's interests are met. And what concerns me is being nearly $1 million, okay, on the shy side. So I agree that I think we ought to exercise, as the mayor is suggesting, which is this option 2, which is to bring these numbers back to PPRTA and ask them to evaluate this, because this, if we continue galloping along in this direction here, okay, this is like buying an air, you know, I used to work for Federal Express, okay, and you can run along with an old plane, a new plane for a long time, and then suddenly, you know, it gets kind of old and it gets a little kind of rickety, and the maintenance costs are really high to run it, and the fuel costs are really high, and you have to kind of make some decisions. You can't just constantly be just romantic about the idea that this worked for us back in 2005. Okay, that's great. But if it's not working right now and we can't reconcile some of these differences, I'm with Judith. I think we need to set a time frame on this, okay? Because I think these kind of facts, we owe our voters, okay, some options in November, okay, as to what to do about this. Because if basically every single year we're getting further and further behind, okay? I'm with Julie. And I noticed that Mr. Grebnick is here. What was the total cost of the Becker's Bridge? Do you remember? $2 million. Okay. So to me, in just a few more years, okay, if we had stemmed the tide of this, we would have had $2 million. And this community is really good about saving money for fire trucks and things like that and financing things in a very careful way. But these are pretty big numbers to kind of be going south on. And so I think we need to, at least avail ourselves very quickly of the PPRTA board to kind of look at kind of our numbers, okay, see it from our standpoint. And then I think one of the things that we need to be ready to do is maybe put something before the voters, okay, with these numbers so that they understand what the ramifications are and get their permission, okay, to be basically funding area projects to the tune of $500,000 a year. I think our voters need to understand that in terms of us staying in PPRTA. This is what you're getting, okay? And I think they need to have some numbers, not just a long laundry list of projects in which Manitou is mentioned twice, in the vote. I think they need to know what the ramifications are, and I think we need to show them the options. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Judith?
Thank you, Mayor. So in the packet, we were presented with 4 possible options moving forward. And while I appreciate that, I'd like to kind of dissect that and segue into what Councilor Shada and Councilor Wolf are saying. Option number 1, vote to allow Fountain, Colorado to join, is premature, way premature. So I consider that off the table. Number 2, ask the PPRTA board to allocate additional capital funds to make up the difference, to me, is assuming that we are going to allow or vote to have a Fountain with a population of a little bit over 29,000 residents, and that would be the 18,739 is somehow making up the difference for them. So I was confused about that. I would say, in my personal opinion, while I appreciate that and support the mayor as our Manitou's voice on the board, asking for additional allocation of funds or revisiting the Fifth Amendment and restated intergovernmental agreement, I would also take into consideration that number 4, pass a resolution to be removed from the PPRTA. We have to be very careful because in the amended and restated IGA under section 12.4, that requires a 2/3 majority of the board in order for us to not have to continue to contribute the sales tax. So to me, with this new 11th hour amended data and the discussion that's been very robust tonight, I'm going to reiterate again, I really feel that we need to bring this back to a work session and really do some due diligence on what's happened in the past, what's happened recently, what is in the best interest of Manitou Springs moving forward. A budget deficit of this kind certainly I'd lose my job if if this was a work-related mistake. I certainly wouldn't want to have this conversation in my household. So why would I want to tell my community that I represent that we're going to continue in this vein is irresponsible in my opinion. However, I do appreciate these regional relationships. My concern moving forward is, are we funding projects that are just going to continue to more traffic congestion, more roads, more population at a time when that is not Manitou's future vision for our community and our regional partners? So again, I will ask that we bring this back to a work session and we really, really do a deep dive into it on a very granular level. Thank you.
Thank you. Natalie and then Julie.
I'm also comfortable moving this forward to a work session. I do think that there's additional conversation and information that we need to have. Additionally, I would be comfortable with the mayor bringing this forward to the PPRTA board so that we do have feedback and understanding from their position on this as well.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. Julie?
I guess this is a question for you, Jeff. So if our voters voted that they wanted to get out of PPRTA, we would still be stuck with PPRTA taking money from our sales tax if the PPRTA board voted that they didn't want to let us out of the deal? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think that's correct. Because the way I read the RTA statute is that even though you terminate participation in an RTA, the Regional Transportation Authority still has to exclude the property from its own boundaries to basically not subject that property to the PPRTA's tax.
Oh, I don't understand what you said.
Okay,
Can
so
you try again?
yeah, I'll say it slower. So there's two provisions that we're dealing with. The first one is terminating participation in the IGA.
Can you go closer to your mic?
Okay,
Thanks.
there's two provisions we're talking about. The first one deals with how the city could terminate its participation in the IGA. And that basically would just be the city council votes to get out of it, or the termination provision. The second provision deals with actually excluding the city boundaries from the RTA boundaries. So that is done by the PPRTA board voting 2/3 to do that. And so if the property of the city remains within the boundaries of the Regional Transportation Authority, even though the city has terminated its participation in the IGA, the city's property is still subject to the PPRTA's taxation. So you,
Sales tax, the money.
yeah,
So
right.
even if so just to simplify, so if we as council or as John Shade suggested, if the voters were to vote that they want us to get out of PPRTA, they would still collect our money if they didn't have a 2/3 vote to let us out. And if they collected our money, they wouldn't have to give it to us. They would just do like how they do now.
Yeah, it's basically, this is really the PPRTA's sales
Discretion.
tax that was approved by the city voters. So ultimately, it's their sales tax, but it's being levied on the city.
Right.
City who's basically
Right.
who are making purchases.
Okay, and if that did happen and we voted to get out, or the citizens voted to get out, and if PPRTA votes that they don't get a 2/3 vote to let us out, how much longer are we in
Well,
statutorily?
so it's a good question. So I think the short answer is you're in PPRTA until they exclude you. But if they want to impose continued mill levies or continued sales tax, I should say sales tax, or I shouldn't say mill levy. If they want to do a new sales tax, that would have to still go to the city voters. So you would basically, this property in the city or the city boundary would be subject to the sales tax until it expires. You would be.
So when does that, so we would be stuck until whatever it is, PPRTA, I can never say that. We'd be stuck with them, or we would be, be forced to stay, have them, give them our sales tax money until what? Until the end of time, until 20 years from now when they expire, or when does our PPTA disappear? When do we would never get out? Like for the rest of time?
Yep.
It would take a statutory statewide law to say Manitou is now allowed to stop giving their sales tax money to our PPTA.
Well,
Or
so I don't
whatever
know
the
how
letters
long-
are.
I don't know how long the PPRTA's ballot approval for the sales tax lasts. I thought it was for 10 years.
That's correct, 10
Yeah.
years. And I think so we're talking about 2035.
Right. So then what happens after that, if PPRTA wants to extend that sales tax or, or impose a new one, it would have to go to the voters of the city of Manitou Springs to
So we're
approve that.
stuck with it for until 2035?
Unless the PPRTA votes to exclude.
Right. But 2035 is when this ends.
It's PPRTA 3 as it's called. So this is an installment. We're actually still at the tail end of PPR TA two. So from.
So the new one is 2025 to 2035.
35, basically. Rick, correct me if
Wow.
I'm wrong on that.
And then the other thing so do I also understand that, so we still owe $400,000 back to PPRTA for that interest-free loan that Denise was talking about? Is
Yeah,
that
that's
right?
my understanding. And we've been paying that, or actually, I guess they deduct it from what there's an
They
accounting
deduct it
procedure.
from
yeah,
our
so they
allocation.
deduct from what we get. So in that sense, I think what we're showing here for allocation should probably be a little higher. I guess if we come back to this in a work session, maybe our spreadsheet could be a little bit more sophisticated, but I think we're not seeing that cash because we've already spent. It was a loan. We're just repaying the loan. So we have that. And I guess we've got several more years of
But it would still be
We're
booked
giving it-
appropriately in a chart that hopefully we're given so that we know. I mean, I would assume that the money they loaned us and that we paid back is not included with the money that we get to keep, because
that's
those
my
are two different
understanding. Yeah,
things.
that's my
Yeah,
understanding, right?
okay.
So there's some details here that I think probably maybe that is a work session topic, and we could go into a little more detail. Last week we had the PPRT meeting last week, and I talked a little bit about this with the other board members, and I tried to think of various scenarios that would be fair. Okay, I mean, because historically, by law, the maintenance has to be done by population. Historically, that's also been the guidelines for the capital. And I think one of the arguments that occurs to me is that, yes, we're a town of maybe population 40, a little over 4,800 people, but on a summer day, we're really a town of maybe more like 12,000 people. I mean, and those are people all using transportation. So I thought maybe we should have some sort of adjustment there. And then I kind of went down a rabbit hole. There's all kinds of different scenarios, I suppose, that could be proposed. The people in Calhan would have a different way of doing it than us, where we have a huge population we have such a large visitor population. I think going back to the PPRTA board and hashing this out is probably the simplest way of doing it, although at the moment it doesn't feel simple, but it probably is. Yeah, there's a topic here that's also in my mind that we should address, and that's kind of the synergy that it has occurred when you go to match federal money and things like that. Sometimes, in my sense, is that we can multiply that money. I guess, Rick, if you could give us an example of that, or tell me if I'm wrong, but you've got the floor.
Certainly, Mayor. Thank you. During the 18 years of the PPRTA, the City of Colorado Springs has offered their capital shares to CDOT to the tune of $25 million, 8.6 million Powers and Old Ranch interchange, Cimarron and I-25, 7.1 million, the Fillmore, the Serpentine overpass, Fillmore over I-25, 1 million, Powers right away, 6.1 million. And I-25 companion projects, that was one of the early ones, probably 2006, 2007, 2.2 million for a total of 25 million. Also, we went to our voters in 2017 and asked to add the 2.5 mile piece of the I-25 gap project that's in between Monument and County Line Road, and asked the voters for a $10 million approval there. And our voters said yes and added that $10 million project. Another dimension of regionalism is matching federal grants. We've been involved usually with the City of Colorado Springs and El Paso County, Baptist West. There was a grant there. Currently, the county's project called I-25 or South Academy from I-25 going up to the Bradley Road and ramps. There's a federal grant that the county is using their capital money to match that. City had a Van Buren project where they matched safe routes to school grant. You probably know Platte over Sand Creek. The city used some of their money to pay for about half of that, and the other half was federal. And then the city the city of Colorado Springs gets lots of bridge federal money called CRISI, CRISI, that's Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements. That's another federal grant that the city of Colorado Springs uses their capital money to match. If I might go out on a limb and advocate for option 2, I'm going out on a limb and saying I would recommend to you to ask Mayor Graham to talk to the board as soon as possible. I would be very hopeful, and this is where I'm out on a limb, that particularly the city and the county, because the city is 70 or 71%, and the county is about 28%, that if the city and the county put their heads together and met with the mayor, that they might come up with some solution that we would keep the capital as using population, but in Manitou's case, it would be census plus X, and that the city and county, since they're most of the capital money, might agree to offer a significant amount of money that might salve the wound here.
Thank you. That was nicely put. Council, I guess, tonight our purpose is to kind of develop some direction. And I think the sentiment that I'm hearing is that you want to do a deeper dive in a work session. So a couple things we've got, Alan and Ann here, we could get their perspective. We can go around the table and see if you want a work session in greater depth. First off, let me ask, do you want to hear from Alan and Ann? Would you? I see heads nodding. Let's do it. Talk is cheap, so we can maybe learn some things without, spending a whole lot of money. So Ann and Alan. Thank you, Rick. Right. Well, you've been here for this whole discussion, so let's just open it up, share your wisdom.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I would say is the perspective.
And I'm sorry, I guess since we're recording
Closer.
this, if you give
Okay.
it your name and address.
Right. Ann Nichols, 208 Pawnee. I am on the PPRTA CAC. And from my perspective, the discussion that you are having now is clearly one that we have never had in the CAC. I don't attend the board meetings, but as I think Denise has indicated, our perspective in the CAC is regional. And I have never seen numbers broken down by entity like is presented in the packet tonight. And I have clearly not seen the revised numbers. So I'm a little at a loss, I think, to say exactly how I would assess that, because it's brand new to me. That is not a perspective that I think probably has ever been discussed with the CAC. And my guess is not with the board, but.
And can you just, for the public and for me, tell everybody CAC, what is CAC? So that
Citizen
people
Ad-
know what you're talking about.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
It's the Citizen Advisory Committee to the PPRTA. Thank you.
Alan Delwich, 210 Via Linda Vista. And I've just been to 4 CAC meetings, Citizens Advisory Committee meetings. So, I have less experience than Ann, but, my observation from this discussion, staring at those spreadsheets, not the updated ones, but what I've seen, we're definitely underwater here. And I think that option 2 is definitely the way to go. Right now we have we're at about 6 to 7%, or 0.6% to 0.7% is our population in relation to the mass. That's only going to get worse in 2031. When you look at, it would be amazing if our population grew by 50%, of 10%, and what's that, 50 to 100 people, maybe some amazing way, maybe we grow by 1,000. But that's tiny, tiny, tiny when you look at what's happening in Colorado Springs. So the numbers are just going to get worse. So I think, talking now is the right solution.
Great. Thank you, Alan. And I guess that kind of jogged my memory too. If you add up the populations of Green Mountain Falls, Calhan and Rama, and multiply by 3, you'd have about the Manitou population, I think, in that ballpark. So those communities have, they get a split or less than we get, which there's a whole question of equity, I suppose. And you're right, Ann, we've at the board, I don't remember we ever have talked about specific boundaries. It's been it's large projects, and some of the projects in the county and the city are so massive they consume a huge amount of money, and pretty much everybody uses those, or a lot of people use them. So it's not tied to exactly where you sleep or where you work. It's how you get to between those places. Okay, council, any questions for Ann or Alan? Comments? Okay, I guess the sense I'm seeing here is that we'd like to take this back to work session, do a little deeper dive, get a little more information. The next PPRTA board meeting is, I believe it's June the 14th. It's the second Wednesday in June. We could probably, I'm wondering if we could address this at the work session, our work session the week prior. Let's see. Denise, we could look at a calendar maybe.
We have the URA on that in the e-bike voucher program right now on that agenda. But if that's the time, we can definitely add it.
Nancy, please.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I'm I'm an advocate for option number 2 as well. Based on many of the same reasons. This is brand new information. The board, I doubt, is even aware of it at all. The board, I think, has been reasonable in the past, and I think that they'll be reasonable and have a good discussion on it in the future. So I would prefer not to have a work session until after this is presented to the PPRTA board, because I think that that's important information for us to have as their perspective on this. Because none of the other communities have done this sort of analysis, and
Okay, Rick.
That's certainly a viable option. I would suggest that I coordinate a meeting of the mayor with city and county staff as soon as possible, so that the preliminary discussions could begin. The city and county staff could then talk to their 3 county directors and 3 city directors, and maybe have a tentative decision in advance of June 14. I'm interested in speed, so I would suggest that option.
Thank you, Rick. John.
Yeah, I think the discussion, I definitely do think that we ought to start the discussions right away with PPRTA. And I'm in favor of option 2 and of option 3. And in addition, I think this council knows how, and we've heard this from Mountain Metro, and we know our own success story by using transit. And I think that's another leg we ought to go back to PPRTA. They are essentially 10% of their funds, according to their agreement, is set aside for transit. And we are heavily dependent upon successful, transit working in our community. We will never dig ourselves out by just building parking garages, widening streets, and doing these other kinds of things. So I think that's another leg we ought to stand on with PPRTA, which is that we have an inordinate amount of visitors. Okay. If we were only looking at this funding rubric for just 5,000 people. Okay. All right. We could probably get along just fine. But right now, we have a huge amount of a whole enterprise fund dedicated to trying to solve this problem. And so to me, I guess I would suggest that we equip the mayor to go back and talk about option 2 and option 3 and add in addition to it, the discussion about how heavily dependent we are on essentially transit. And that because of our huge tourist oriented and visitor oriented thing. And I noticed that PPRTA, okay, did kind of a rather clever thing, which was to write in their charter that they did not collect a visitor tax. And that's not what normally happens in other communities, okay? And without that visitor tax we have in Manitou, okay, our chamber and our whole, and a lot of our economic development wouldn't be happening. So we already have an inordinate tax burden on essentially our community here. We collect a 2% lodging tax, okay? And again, I want to go over this issue with essentially transit funding, that we need help in that department, okay? Because we will never, ever, okay, dig ourselves out of our congestion and our traffic by just doing more PPRTA type projects in the traditional sense of just building roads or parking spaces, okay? We know that. And this is one of the great success stories, I think, of our city, is that we have really stepped out, okay, and made it so that transit in our community is free to our visitors. And it shows in our ridership, okay? And if all of those people were moving their cars all over town because we did not have this transit strategy, and I think we're really committed to expanding that and making it work even more for us. And so I think that's another thing that we ought to really ask PPRTA for especially some special consideration for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
I thoroughly agree with the transit portion that the counselor just mentioned. I, again, would go out on a limb and say that there might be an opportunity there. Of course, City of Colorado Springs controls all the transit money, but I think there might be an opportunity there.
Okay, and I would say that Mountain Metro has they've responded favorably. I mean, when they first started out at our electric bus, they were going to test it somewhere else in Colorado Springs, somewhere in eastern Colorado Springs, and then it looks like it may be coming to Manitou. So they responded. They knew that we had some environmental issues that we wanted to address, and that we were interested in electric transportation. So yeah, I think we've got some favorable inroads there. So I think that's a good tack to take. Council, so Rick suggested that he and I and the county and City of Colorado Springs get together and see if we can, and Denise, excuse me, and we can get together and get some more capital money out of them, I guess, to put it bluntly. I'd be willing to do that. We could then discuss this at a work session if that sounds agreeable to you. If you got other ideas, this is the time to mention it.
I'd really like to see if Denise can help us find a date for that work session now, if that's doable. Otherwise, I'm afraid with so many other things going on that this could fall between the cracks. Can we do that? Get it on the calendar?
You know, let's see, our next work session would be June the 13th, I think.
And that's before the PPRTA meeting. And it was mentioned to wait till after the PPRTA meeting and then have the work session. So it's a direction of where you want to go. That 13th is the URA and the e-voucher program.
How about the following one? 2
Yeah.
weeks later?
I'm thinking that conflicts with Colorado Municipal League. I think there's 4 or 5 of us that are going to be at Colorado Municipal League that week. Is that?
Yeah, the CML. So we'd probably have to look at a special work session, Mayor, and see if we can get it on the calendar.
Mr. Mayor,
Sorry, go ahead, John.
I think we ought to try and work on this at least partially on the 13th, because in my opinion, to just go to PPRTA and go, oh, help us in the whole 9 yards. I think we need to have a specific proposal. okay, of stuff we want, that we equip the mayor and at least have some granularity on what that is, okay? Because I think that's really hard of another board to listen to us just go, oh, we're kind of hurting and here's our numbers that we're sort of kind of upside down. And then they're going to go running out and maybe do all their own studies in the whole 9 yards. I think we ought to be very specific, okay, and have and really try and hone this in on the 13th so that when we send the mayor to that meeting, there's some real numbers and whatnot and some real concrete ideas, okay, as opposed to, oh, we're all upside down, you know, by $1 million. Can you help us? And so that's my vote in terms of, I don't know what we could achieve on the 13th, but I think that's just my opinion in terms of that we have something more concrete on the 13th. And then I think the mayor can bring back the report from the 14th in terms of how that went. And then we can continue on in this dialogue and try and work this out. If we really believe in all this regional, you know, kumbaya, okay, then it's going to take us probably a few months to kind of iron this out. And it seems like to me, the more concrete we are with proposals and things like that, that we want to ask for money for, okay, things that we can utilize, okay, all right, in fairly short order, okay, projects that we've wanted to do that we can start to accelerate. It would seem like to me the board would want to hear that. Just thought.
Rick, thank you, John. Rick?
Again, I'm going out on a limb. I'm interested in speed. I'm optimistic that with the mayor and Denise and I meeting with city staff and county staff, that we can develop a proposal that the city and county staff then clear with their 3 county directors, 3 city directors. So there's 6 votes out of 10 on the PPRTA board in advance of the meeting on the 14th. And that draft proposal, you know, staff to staff might be something to present to you on the 13th. And then if you give that a thumbs up, then it would go to the board on the 14th. And again, I'm interested in speed.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Julie?
The question for Rick. Do you think, Rick, that if we give an updated chart like this and to have some more numbers in there to show them that we're in the hole by 1,046,000 and some change, do you think that would be just as effective as if we presented a list of projects that we really need help with right now, as Councilman Shada had suggested? What's your opinion?
I think the spreadsheet would be the best.
Suffice?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And Mayor, I was also going to suggest, if it would help, because the URA is a big topic and we don't want to be rushed, if we should perhaps meet at 4 or 5 that day rather than starting the meeting at the customary 6 p.m. time. That's just another option, because I don't want us to have to feel pressured to squeeze in such important things into just a few hours, and I don't want to be here till midnight.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I think sometimes starting in the late afternoon is helpful. I think our energy levels are all better then. Yeah, so the June 13th. Well, I mean, we've got a little bit of time here. I suppose if we were to tentatively if we anticipated starting earlier that night, that would be good. As things actually shape up, maybe we wouldn't need it. So we'll take that under advisement. As we get a little closer, we could make the decision. So I guess the question would be at our regular meeting on June the 6th, we try to give council an update. And if we felt we need to start at 4, we'll hold council at that time and decide what to do, if that sounds agreeable. Council, I think the sentiment that I'm sensing here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Denise and I and Rick get together with Colorado Springs and El Paso County and try to come up with some sort of more favorable agreement for Manitou Springs. We get that done, hopefully, so we have something to look at a work session on June the 13th. and hopefully not take a whole lot of time on that. And then when the board meets on the 14th, the following day, I'd know what kind of direction you wanted me to pursue. Does that sound agreeable to council? Okay, see head nods. Okay, we don't need a formal vote, so that'll be our direction. Rick, so you and I and Denise will be talking here the next day to figure out when to get together. So very good. Council, I appreciate your delving into this. This is not a simple topic, so appreciate it. And let's take a 15-minute break.
Rick, thank you for coming. That really
Yeah.
helped us.
Yes, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, if we can get started here. Resume. Okay, so the next item under business H2 is discussion of the Manitou Express tram selection. We've got Roy and Dole.
Good evening, Roy Cheney, Deputy City Administrator. I'm with Bill Grabenick, the city engineer, and we're going to talk about something exciting, and that's trams. And we've been talking a little bit about it here in the last hour, how important mobility is. So we're happy to bring this tonight to talk about the tram. And as you know, we went from trolley to cutouts to vans to trams. So we're really excited about the tram idea, price wise, what it can do. I had an experience on my vacation just a couple of weeks ago using a tram. And I thought it was the funnest thing to get on. It was really easy to get on. They had ADA access. So it was really a neat experience. So I think that is also important so that people have interest in getting on the tram here. We will talk about, and pretty soon I'll pass it on to Dole and he'll go over all the different pricing in the trams. But we will look at as a pilot program on and getting data so we can bring back to council on how the tram's working. Ridership, also the routes is something that we can work on. And what's nice is we can make changes as we need to and not have to go through a long year process to do route changes. We can tweak that as we need to try to make this the most effective way to move people in town. And we're also going to be looking at visitors and residents, how we can use the tram to benefit both and make that work and for everybody. So at this point, I'll pass it on to Dole and the PowerPoint to go over the trams, the prices, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, good evening. Dole Grabenick, city engineer. That was a terrific segue into mobility to get to talk about PPRTA before this. I will say that tonight is a little bit bittersweet because Roy and I are super excited about this. But if something does get approved, that also means we have a whole lot of work ahead of us. So thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So in your packet tonight, I tried to present as much information as I could about what we're looking for. So pretty much what I've tried to summarize is we have trams from two different suppliers. One supplier gave us a lot more options, sizes, and then this electric gave us one. And so we tried to compare them in size. So I'm sure you can read that, but we tried to compare the two different sizes in seating capacity, delivery cost, and then delivery date, and then how many they would seat. And we also compared an enclosed tram compared to an open air tram. And each have benefits. So if there's any questions on this slide, this is just kind of data for you guys to kind of know where we're coming from. All right. Oh, next slide, please. Okay, as a reminder, there was money allocated for these in the capital budget. We originally were, potentially were considering trolleys, and then looking through all the challenges, we really did arrive at trams. So next slide. This is the same route that we've been discussing for quite a while. I've simply called it the primary route, and it in theory is servicing kind of the Hiawatha Memorial Park area along Manitou Avenue to Cannon to Park, and then up to the Serpentine Roundabout, and then back through downtown on Manitou Avenue, and then back circulating back around to Memorial Park, connecting in with Hiawatha. Next slide. Again, this is one that brings up a lot of questions whenever I share it, but this is just, we've kind of dubbed it the secondary or various routes. And it was just kind of a little snapshot of what the trolley could potentially run if Manitou Springs was in control of it. And what Roy was referring to a moment ago is that Mountain Metro has been a terrific partner in shuttling people in and around Manitou and up and down from Hiawatha to the incline and the Pikes Peak Cog Railway. To change those routes, it's quite a process. It takes 6 months. You have to identify the route, the changes you want to make. You have to give it to Mountain Metro. They have to review it. Then it has to go out to public comment, and then they implement it the next route cycle. So the whole thing takes 6, 7, 8 months to change a Mountain Metro route. They have federal requirements. It's not their fault. It's just how that process works. I highlight this because and Roy mentioned piloting, no pun intended, to a tram, but is that as we understand how people will use the tram, residents, tourists, employees, we would have the authority and the ability as the city to alter the routes as we wanted to, as we needed to. So I just want to highlight that. Next slide, please. You've seen this before. I changed it a little bit to what the trams are capable of. They're actually quite torquey little vehicles that can run for quite a few miles. They are in the presentation I gave you. I attached all 5 of the price sheets that shows all the real details of each of the trams, battery sizing, capacity. I mean, kind of all of those really, the details. And then the options in there are what Roy and I selected as what we thought would be kind of a good balance between like an unnecessary feature versus something that we think would make riding the trams a better experience. So there are things, and maybe I'll get to those in a minute. The other thing about the trams that we talk about is they could be great for special events. When we have road closed and we want to have an off area parking for the coffin races, we could help move people from another outside area into near downtown or where the first closure is. Rick Sonnenberg said several times, I'm going on a limb here, which meant I think this is an idea, so don't quote me, but I think there could be a potential to partner with the school district and help move. I've attended a Manitou Springs girls basketball game. Both my daughters play, and we've been there, and they had multiple games happening, and people were parking, as you guys know, all up and down Almonte, all on Manitou Avenue, and they were walking up those hills. So, there could be opportunities that if they were coordinating with the city to be like, hey, we're going to have prom, we're having a graduation, we're having a football game. And then Manitou Springs school visitors, families could park at other places, and the trams could bring them up or down those steeper roads and all the way up to the school. Again, I'm just going on a limb. We haven't spoken to the school district about it. It's just trying to communicate some options. All the ADA, all the trams that we proposed to you are all ADA compliant. So that means that they generally have 120 volt charging, which means you can plug them into just about any outlet. It does need to be a 30 amp service, which is a little bit more than a residential, but very common on the commercial side, not a big deal. And then because they can be charged somewhat efficiently, at a normal outlet, they could be charged midday just about anywhere throughout the city that had a power outlet. You don't have to have a special EV charger or something like that to charge them. Next slide, please.
Thing on this slide?
Yeah.
May I? 28 passengers capacity. Is that referring to a specific vehicle? Because the chart above showed
23.
choices of either 10 or 18 per people per tram.
I think that might have been a carryover from the tram presentation. The chart that I showed previously and the price quotes, those are the correct numbers. So the 18 and the 10. Do you want to go back to the chart?
Oh, no, so what you're saying is on this screen where it says capacity 28 passengers, it really means capacity 10 or 18, depending what you choose?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. So this is a difficult slide because there's a lot of assumptions happening here, but this is some of the similar math I've shared with what we potentially think it could cost to operate the trams. I did put a note in the memo that when Roy recently held one of the Citizens Academy events, that this idea, the trams came up, and he had 3 people meet, talked to him after the presentation and said that they would love to be a volunteer driver for the tram. So, you know, maybe there's a chance that we could have some volunteers and they sign up for routine shifts. You know, I'm one of the things that this has to be able to do is it has to be reliable. Is Jeff going to be a volunteer?
Well, you can't do that. You're gonna have a card, you're gonna have insurance for each person? How would that work?
You bring up a terrific point, which
Okay.
is my point at the beginning of the meeting where I said, if something were to get improved, we have a lot of work ahead of us because it was just thrown out. We don't know any of the logistics. We don't know any of the insurances. We don't know any of the requirements. But the point is, there could be a big interest in helping support this from within our community. And that would reduce the operational costs. It would also have people be engaged in the community. You know, we did put on there the idea of having the PA system. So the individual drivers would be able to interact with the occupants. The other thing, I'm just all over the place here, in talking with the manufacturer, one of the points that they made as we were talking through some of the options was you really want to protect the driver from the elements, not so much the passengers. And the reason why is because the driver is just in the vehicle getting really hot from the sun or really cold all day. The passengers are generally outside at some point, get on the tram and are back outside again. So they're ready for the weather. If they're on the tram for 3 minutes and it's hot, they have a little bit of fresh air coming in. If they're cold, they're dressed for the elements. But so the way we set those trams up is the front of the trams have the heater or the fans to keep the drivers cool. So she made a really good point that you really want to try to keep the drivers as comfortable as possible. The occupants just kind of come and go. And by the time you would even warm up to them, they'd be getting off anyways. So I just want to point that out. Next slide, please. So I highlighted some things here. Again, I kind of talked about some of these. A 1-year warranty, which is not a long time considering potentially how much use there is. But the flip side is they're fairly simple. I mean, these are a glorified larger golf cart, which is why you can tell by the pricing why they're not $250,000 and they're $48,000. On the price, we did have them price out doing a custom vinyl wrap and doing a design session not with me. It's not what I'm good at. So we would want to have, and I reached out to the supplier and said, hey, how's this process work? And basically we would someone would need to meet with their design team and then agree to it. And then they print it and they wrap it and it would arrive to us completely wrapped and ready to go. It is something we could take on ourselves if you wanted to, but I do think this is an opportunity to really make it cute. I don't know a better word. But very Manitou-esque. And, you know, we've named it kind of the Manitou Express, and that of course could be changed. It's just kind of what we came up with. But I think that could be a really fun part of this experience and to really make it obvious that this is what this is for. Next slide. I mentioned some of the upcoming tasks, and then we'll really talk about some of the features. Drivers are probably challenge number one, you know, as it was pointed out, like insurances, liabilities. I mean, all those kind of things are very important and those need to be worked through. Maintenance of them, we need to make sure that our facilities and mechanic can service these, maintain these. You know, if these are going to be high use, they have to be cleaned. They have to be presentable. They have to be taken care of. Storage, you know, we need to make sure and store these in a way that protects them and keeps them vibrant throughout the whole season. And then I did highlight on there, and I put it on each of the table there, the delivery. So one of the things about this that we like is these are manufactured in outside Las Vegas and get trucked here. And she thinks she could have us. And I put it on the chart, but in as early as 60 days from when we ordered them. And as Rick kept saying, you know, Roy and I are very motivated to get them in town as quickly as possible because we think the benefits could be immediate. And that would also give a little bit of time to figure out some of the growing pains. You know, we would want to run this limited windows, understand how it's used, how the batteries usage continues, what the driver experience is like. How many riders we get, we think that the driver will need to have a little clicker and kind of keep an eye and kind of do like an hourly log. And then we'll need to kind of meet and talk. And, one of the things we think is, if this were to get approved, to probably have like a Manitou Express task force that we could meet with that could help resolve some of things, help process data, just be involved and not have it necessarily just be all on us. So the community could be involved and engaged. And then once these get rolled out, maybe the task force would meet, once a month or something like that to kind of how are things going, what's going on. We like this, we don't like this, so on and so forth.
Julie? Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
So in terms of keeping count, I know this is a minor issue, but it's a bigger concern of mine. So people get on and off. It's not like a bus where you have to get on or off at either the front door or one of two doors. This one, you just hop on or off. If I understand the drawing, the picture, the photo correctly, you just hop on or off any row you want to get on, right?
Correct.
And you think that a driver with a clicker is going to be able to keep track of that? What do you mean?
So terrific question, and probably not. However, what the driver could note is that he was full, the tram was full for the whole time, or he could give us feedback of every time I came up to a stop, there were people waiting to get on and they were disappointed because there weren't enough chairs, or they could give us feedback of, I had 3 people the whole day.
Right,
And
that
all-
makes more sense.
Yes, all of that
Yeah.
information would be helpful for us. And of course, Roy and I will ride around and understand and chit chat and visit and with the passengers, the driver. We did that quite a bit with Mountain Metro. We hopped on their shuttles with them and we actually learned quite a bit. Like one of the challenges with Mountain Metro Route 33 is that as they're driving along Manitou Avenue, there are several stops for Route 33 that if there's someone there, the shuttle is required to stop. Well, guess what? That shuttle almost always is during the busy time when it's left Hiawatha. It's full. So the shuttle pulls up to someone waiting to stop, and then the door opens and the driver says, I'm sorry, the shuttle's full. And then he's like, well, but why'd you stop? I have to, yeah. So the point is, like, we learned about that. So we've been talking with Mountain Metro about, I'm totally digressing here, but on their little marquee, can they say shuttle's full? Now, by law, they still have to stop, but at least they could be like, the shuttle's full, I'm sorry, type thing. But we're looking at maybe changing it so they don't have to stop. And then that's where perhaps the tram could pick up, but not to service Upper Ruxton. Upper Ruxton, we did get a request from the museum, Merrimont Castle, that they would love to have the tram maybe somehow circulate through there. So again, it goes into like communicating with them and visiting to their guests, that the castle tells their guests, hey, if you're coming for tea at this time, please park here. The tram will pick you up at this time. So all those things are opportunities for us to kind of not have people, because, she struggles with how much or little parking they have and where people park when they want to come have tea. So as word is kind of getting out, we're having people reach out to us and say, hey, we would like you to visit us and visit this area as well. And so I think that's kind of the beginning of us connecting the city with these trams. Yeah. Do you have the PDFs of the price quotes? I don't know if he has them on the screen, right? If you wouldn't mind, just kind of highlight a few of the features. We did all the same features across all 4 trams. So we just need to talk about one of them. Oh yeah, thanks. If you could just make that big. Okay, so this one is seats up to 10, has the driver, and then it has an ADA wheelchair ramp, okay? And then just keep kind of scrolling down if you don't mind. Oh, there's pictures at the top. We upgraded and learned about the battery system. Some batteries are better than others. There's just a bunch of things that we added to. We put bumpers on it. So for, upgraded power steering, made them look nice. upgraded plastic seating, so it's more durable if it gets a lot of people coming and getting off and getting on. I mean, I hope everyone's had a chance to look over it. Some of the things we didn't do is there is a solar panel feature where you can put solar panels on the top. But in talking with the supplier, the benefit you get from that is pretty small and marginal considering the cost of it. It's almost better to just plug in for that same amount of time. So I guess tonight we were wanting to kind of share and summarize everything we've been talking about thus far, and to kind of share with you where we think is the best ideal balance of moving people for cost, and then also to identify that there's a lot of challenges ahead of us in managing these. And that's it for me.
I would just state on what Dole mentioned, the volunteers, what we found interesting was they were willing to volunteer, but one of the things I told them, we could hire them and pay them to do this. So we may have to do that based on when we check with CIRSA. So we still have to look at some things with that. But if we're able to do volunteers and we're able to put it with CIRSA, with insurance, because we do a volunteer program with CIRSA already in some areas like the pool. But if not, then we would look at paying them to do the job. But they have interest. They're from Manitou. They want to talk about Manitou as they're driving. This sounded very interesting and they were excited. So, but that's basically tonight we're asking if we can have a go ahead to do a pilot, get some of these units and start testing them out and see what we can do.
Which ones do you prefer? Which ones do you recommend and why?
So you have some on there. The unit that was up is the kind of the unit we were looking at. Is that right? Yeah. Yes.
So that's a good question. And the smaller one, yeah, would you scroll up on that? Right. So this seats up to 10 people. This is the smaller one. You know, part of me thinks that this would probably navigate some of the narrower, curvier roads potentially on Manitou. It's also just small and effective. The engineer in me struggles with not having more capacity. 10 people is helpful, but would you go to one of the other ones, like the KV 20 or KV 23? SV, thank you. Specialty vehicles is what it stands for. I should have known that.
May I entertain a question or a comment? The way I looked at it, the SV 23, and I would go for an enclosed vehicle that's wrapped. I mean, it's Manitou, and we want to use this not just in the tourist season, but year round, hopefully. I'm going to pull a Shada and say that I did this for a price of $65,900 for 18 people. That's $3,661 a head. And for the 10 people for the enclosed SV 14 at 46,800, that's 4,680 per person. So in my personal, if they have the same shelf life, the same warranty, the same battery, and we can get them around town, I would prefer getting more, bang for our buck and going for the 18-seater enclosed vehicle. Or one of each at least as our pilot, but prefer 2 of the 18. So this is just a thought.
You took my punchline. But I do think for the amount of money, one driver can move more people. I think you improve the efficiency, the opportunity, and that's 18 versus 10 times every trip and load throughout the city. And I also think if people see capacity, they'll be more likely to use it and a little bit of curiosity. So yes, I think the larger ones, the only benefit I see of the smaller one is getting up and around some of the more curvier parts of Manitou, but I'm not necessarily sure that we are planning that for a route yet. So,
Well, and are the smaller ones necessarily more narrow or are they just shorter?
the turning radius is tighter.
Oh. Okay.
But I think one driver moving 18 people is more cost effective than one driver moving 10 people.
Mr. Shada?
Well, and I think the other thing too is you go with a 15 kilowatt kind of thing. We have lots of, we have a fair number of days in which we have a lot of people here. But we also have an awful lot of days in which we don't have a lot of people. And to me, having this beefier, electric unit, even though it isn't full, means you're not having to charge it as often, okay? And means that maybe in those outlying areas, we can kind of do some more experimenting with it in terms of having range and whatnot. That's the thing that makes me leery about kind of these smaller units. The other thing that I want to ask about is that I notice on this SV23, maybe you could speak to these things that are optional items that aren't in the package. And did you talk to the vendor about basically what does essentially $11,000 get you in terms of with this lithium ion battery and charger? Why would we pick that or not? Why wouldn't we? As an example, given that there's almost no places that we would want to go that don't have a little bit of a hill.
So it's not so much a torque thing because the voltage is the same across the batteries.
Right.
It has to do with the life of the batteries and the serviceability of the batteries. The lithium ion are the best of the 3 battery packages they offer. We chose one upgraded version, but it's up there and they want you to see it because they would love to upgrade. So that would be something that if I wish I could tell you that it means that we go from 2,000 charge cycles to 2,500 life cycles, charge cycles. I don't know how that information. It was just that they're the best batteries that are available. They would run the longest, they last the longest, but the voltage is the same. So the torque therefore is the same.
So I have another question, Mr. Mayor. So in the particular case that we order one without, let's say, this SV23 that's toward the end of this thing here, that's about $11,000. Are those things that if in 2 years we've run our course with the original battery pack that we can upgrade to this? In other words,
Yeah, the batteries are it's interchangeable. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay, thank you.
Julie?
So does that mean then that we would be able to likewise add some of the other optional items in the future if we wanted to? Those don't
Would you just
necessarily
that
have
up
to
for
be
me?
integrated into the original tram that we purchased. Is that right?
Some could, some need to be built in to the system. Like for example, you can get a trailer hitch on this that we opted for because if we wanted to put like a little cargo basket back there or something, if someone had luggage and they wanted to drop it in there, whether it's travel, I mean, but that would be a harder thing to maybe retrofit. So we tried to look at what the seats, if you didn't upgrade the seats now, it would be really cumbersome to go and because you have to ship them in, dispose of the other ones. So I think to your point, some of them can be, modded in and out, and then some of them you really probably want to identify at the beginning.
And can you identify for us, you just did one example with the seats, but are there any optional items that it's now or never that we should know about?
The upgraded motor, the initial type of battery. Now, those can be changed out, but if we're going to spend this money, we should run them for the full service life. Like we shouldn't be like, oh, we want lithium now, 6 months later. Like we
Right.
should run those batteries through their full service life. If it was enclosed or not enclosed. So we asked about, well, what if you just have it enclosed and you take the doors off? And the way the hinges are and stuff, it's not designed to do that way because then there are hinges, kind of like on the Polaris where it comes out and there's a pin on it. So then you have these pins and edges sticking out for people. So it's like you would want to either have it be enclosed and plan to keep it enclosed or have it open and plan to keep it open, I think. So that would be one.
Can you explain the tow package? I mean, why? I mean, would we want to consider if this breaks down, is it expensive to tow somewhere to get repaired? There's a $500 tow package. And then I also want to ask about the heat and defrost for $300.
Yeah, so the tow package, the reason why they have that is these can be hooked up to a battery, what do they call it? Like a secondary vehicle that's just seats in a battery to extend the range. And actually the last slide on the presentation shows that example, the one that says like questions or thank you. It shows how it can happen. I can't remember what they call it now. But that's part of what the tow package is for. It's not necessarily to help us tow the vehicle if it breaks down. It's for the vehicle to tow something. So that's primarily for the driver and the front windshield. Again, there you go. So that's what it looks like if you wanted to do the tow package in the second following vehicle. The benefit of that is that second vehicle is full of battery and it extends your range. It slows down your performance. I think it's more cost effective to do the larger 18-passenger shuttle than to try to do this. You have one driver, you don't have as many moving parts, and I think it's a better solution.
So looking at this SV23, why wouldn't we pick the $4,000 air conditioning package? I know that's not on the quote.
So you would only want to do that one with the enclosed, and it's a major battery use. And part of the thing also, you got to think about how we are thinking this is going to get used. So, you know, how much, so let's just role play that someone gets picked up near the Chamber of Commerce and is heading westbound on Manitou Avenue and gets dropped off near Ruxton. Now, on a busy summer day, that probably takes how many minutes? 5?
Well, yeah, but I mean, if it's 105 degrees in there, 5 minutes, it'll still be very strange. You don't want, people aren't used to, I mean, it doesn't have to be like 75 degrees in there in the winter, but you don't want people getting that.
True. So, but you got to think about that people are constantly getting off and on. The doors are constantly getting open and closed. Some of the windows may be open because people are hot. I think if someone was going to be on the tram if the same people were going to be on the tram for the entire trip for 20 minutes, then you would maybe look at the value of the air conditioner. Now, to your point, if you say get an air conditioner, we can get an air conditioner. It's a major battery consumer, so we would just have to understand.
But it's only when it's running.
Correct. Correct.
All right. Thank you.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, there would be windows, but if the AC's on, do you have everyone roll the windows up and then they're hot, they roll them down, the AC's not keeping up. So that was kind of our thought. It's not that we couldn't do it, but that would be something you would want to order at the beginning and not retroactively.
Question. Okay, so like the SV23 enclosed, it looks like it's $65,900. In the optional items, if you tally that up, that's close to another $29,000. So it includes, now we're saying but it says not included in the price, and I want to be clear on that. Okay. Okay, optional, not included. Is this a wish list? Are there a couple of things here that you want to add in, or?
I think the supplier was showing us some of the other features that we didn't opt to try to help sell us on some of those features. So if you'll scroll down to the bottom of that PDF, so it shows the original vehicle sale price, and then, well, I guess that sale price includes all those options. And then the delivery was quite a bit cheaper than the other supplier because they get trucked in from Las Vegas, outside Las Vegas, Nevada, Henderson, Nevada.
Sorry, could we scroll to the top of that display there? Okay, I was looking at the enclosed one, so, okay, I was confused on that. Okay. But the prices you're showing on the presentation, I think it was the second or third slide, that's really the model, that's the package you're proposing, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
Could be added or subtracted from, but that's kind of what we're proposing. And all four should have the same features. It's just the different sizes and then whether it's enclosed or not enclosed. And I think for lack of a better motivation, I think Rona maybe think that we get one enclosed and one open. But I think the open has a certain benefits and I think the enclosed has certain benefits. And then we could kind of learn as a city how we like to operate.
Can I ask a question about that? Because I would be more of a fan of two enclosed. I don't know how many we're thinking about buying, but I mean, this being Colorado and us wanting to run them year round. I'm a big avid, passenger of 36 and I don't know, sometimes it rains, sometimes it's windy. I mean, if we get one that's open, do we have to make that decision now, or can we go back and say, oh, we open one, now we want to enclose it? I think that's a decision we have to make now.
It is. The open one does have the vinyl cover, but I think that would be
I
really
would opt for
cumbersome.
two of the SV, the 18 seat SV 23 that are both enclosed.
So I'm glad you're bringing it up. One of the things about the enclosed is you have the door and there's some interaction with the door to get in and out, right? So that you're also kind of contained. So you have the windows down. We could get air conditioning, but you're only going to be on the tram for your trip. And so one of the things to be thinking about is how long is that average trip going to be? And then is that climate control going to be enough for that 3, 4, 5 minute trip? So, and then the other thing is if we got an open air one and an enclosed one, the enclosed one could kind of be the primary one that we run most of the time. And then the open air one could be the one that we run during the busier times. So the enclosed one could be the one that runs really every day of the year, so to speak. And then the enclosed one is the one that, okay, it's the busier time of year. We bring on the open air tram at 10 a.m. on Friday, Saturday, Sunday type thing. So those are the kind of things we've been thinking about. Could we do 2 enclosed? Yes. Could we do 2 open air? Yes. Would it be a little colder in the wintertime? Could be. But I felt like 1 open, 1 closed was a good balance and allowed us to kind of meet the different needs.
Julie?
At first I was really excited about the open air one because it just looks like fun. But I think as a practical matter, and I think if this works well, we're going to need more than 2. I mean, 18 people, that's so ridiculous. That's like a teeny weeny drop of water out of a whole, swimming pool. So it's going to be such a minor impact on helping our mobility problems anyway. This is more just to see if it, how it works and how it negotiates our streets and the battery and all that. So I would suggest we start with, instead of going sexy, I think we should start with the more practical thing of getting an 2 enclosed vehicles so that we can truly use it year round. If I knew I was going to have to sit on a tram and get pounded on by hail or sideways rain coming in, I don't think I'd go, even if I thought, well, it's only for 4 minutes. So I just think Judith's suggestion is more practical, and then come back and then in the future, we could maybe look at looking an open air one, but that open air one won't be used as many days of the year as the closed one. They're not going to go out and use it if it's a horrible weather day. They'll cancel it and tell that driver to stay home that day or come into work and we'll pay you to sweep the floor or something. So we're not paying you for nothing. But I think we should start with something that will work year round every day, even though it's less sexy than the fun little summer vehicle. It's like having a convertible versus a car,
Thank you. Mr. Shada?
I guess I would go with the 2 enclosed, and I agree with all what you're saying, But I think the branding of this and the fact that you don't have any space to do any wrapping on the enclosed ones, that there is no space on there. And to me, I think part of this interesting concept, okay, of this branding has everything to do with people knowing what the look is, having a consistent look, okay, and having that identity, okay, I think is invaluable so that people know what to expect. Because I think when you're in a little small town like this, and suddenly, I think you need to have this perception that these things are, you have enough of them that they're running and they're trustworthy, okay, and they're easy to spot, okay, and they're not so different that you're like going, oh, that doesn't look like what we got on, you know what I mean? So I think that's the other thing to choose the enclosed thing, is I think that it gives us a lot of space to do some very interesting side panel branding, which I think is really important to creating this notion that, oh, I keep seeing that vehicle and it's the same one. And I have no idea whether they're seeing 2 or 3 or 10. But I think once we start kind of trying all these different things, I think you start to kind of start confusing your message in terms of what you're trying to do from a transit standpoint. So that's just my thoughts on that little different twist than the enclosed thing. I think the enclosed thing too does give us a little more shoulder season stuff too. And I don't know, I guess I'm just a little uncomfortable with essentially this golf cart kind of thing. In terms of that you've got kids on there and the whole 9 yards, and that you're just right there to, that you're just trusting your passengers not to kind of leap out. I know it seems a little safer to me. Thank you.
Would you mind pulling out the enclosed one, the SV23 enclosed? So, Mr. Sheda, you're totally right. I mean, you can see how much wrapping square footage there is. I mean, the experience is significant. So totally agree with you. Also, so just to help with this, let's also talk worst case scenario. Let's say that Manitou does invest in these and the ridership is abysmal. Let's say it's not being utilized. It doesn't matter why, but let's just say it's not being utilized. You know, Roy and I have brainstormed, you know, they could be a special event. They could be used for the school still. Worst case scenario, the seats could be pulled out and they could become utilitarian for the city to move city staff, plumbing supplies, pipe when they're going to do stuff. I mean, the vehicle would not be wasted because it would still be an electric, rather large, especially if you pulled the seats out, you know. So, I mean, worst case scenario, for whatever reason, if we had terrible ridership and the city was like, Dole, that was a dumb idea, we could still make them functional for the city. And, you know, they'd have to be charged at whatever time, but we could still have them be usable in some way or fashion.
Mayor, can I?
Yeah, please, Denise.
We need to be careful on that because this is being paid by enterprise money. So we'd have to make sure that we took care of that from a book perspective and from the financials, which would be easy to do, but I just want to make sure I mention that.
And just remember too, we have 10% discretion with these funds, right?
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
right, thanks.
So Dole, I was going to ask, what's the typical speed of the top speed on these things?
25 miles an hour. And I think it says it on there, or maybe it's on their website, but it's approximately about 25 miles an hour. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that during the busiest time of the season, not when it's maybe shorter seasons or off season, you know, operating speeds on Manitou Avenue are much slower than the posted. So these would be cruising along with traffic and going slow. And you know, there's a lot of logistics to work out, but the operating speed during the busy season will be less than the posted speed.
Okay, Nancy?
Excuse me, if we have a off-site parking, say for an event that's outside of Manitou, I know there was a question previously if these could be used on non-Manitou roads.
We reached out to the city of Colorado Springs traffic engineer and he didn't seem to have a problem with it.
Okay, and definitely the window's open, correct?
Oh, yeah, the
Can
the
you
window
repeat that? I
slide.
couldn't hear your first question or your second question. So if you could move the mic just a tad closer, I'd really like to know what you're saying.
My question was if these could be taken off of Manitou roads. If we had an offsite parking area during an event.
Yeah, and the city of
And-
Colorado Springs didn't have a problem with it. I think, yeah, we wouldn't want to go anything, Highway 24 or anything like that.
I mean, we've talked multiple times about going down the Safeway thing to see if we could get access to parking.
I
down
think
there.
that should be a goal for the program. I think we would want to check with Sursa as well, just to make sure there
Okay.
wasn't some restriction there.
And I did want to make a possible suggestion when you're designing the wrap. Crane has helped a great deal and had contests for folks, Manitou artists. And that might be an interesting and appropriate way to, I don't know if there's enough time to do it, but if you've not coordinated with Crane, that might be a option.
We already talked about it. We just didn't want to mention it yet. So, but that would be great. They've been helpful for us.
Okay, John?
So I'm old enough that we used to have 2 trolleys here that we used to run. And one of the great routes was to go up to Balance Rock and around to the trading posts and come back into Manitou. So I think that's a real great consideration, but that would just leave our city limits just a little bit. And I think that'd be really interesting to know whether Sursa is going to cover us if we had a little situation that happened, something like that. I wouldn't anticipate with these things that we would probably get any further afield than that, or maybe Safeway like Nancy suggests, and I think that enclosure thing too, especially now that I'm thinking about some kinds of things down to Safeway. Yeah, I don't think I want my groceries sitting on the bench seat there. You know what I mean? I'm
the
having to
sun.
kind of corral those things, coming back into Manitou. So another thought to do 2 enclosed vehicles. Thank you.
And the windows do open. I'm sorry.
Just one quick question. So speaking of the wrapping, is that included in this price or, and that we would do that in-house here? Right, we would, so in other words, the company wouldn't wrap it for us, would they?
No,
Or-
it would arrive wrapped.
Okay.
They have a design. They have a company that does it that meets with us. And they
I see.
develop.
Oh, you did mention that. Okay,
Yes,
thank you. I'm
and
sorry.
then they'll
I
wrap
remember
it.
that.
It'll arrive wrapped
Okay.
and it'll look awesome.
So does that give us time? If you said it would be delivered in 60 days, does that give us time to be responsible for coming up with our own wrap design?
It depends.
Like they might say, it'll be 60 days after you decide what you want to do for the wrap. That could be like one of the possibilities.
So the wrapping is a big part of their business. And so they have that process. I mean, as like, if we were to give them the design today, they'd be like, okay, great. So I think if the direction was to do this, we would contact them. We would place the order. We would say, we want to wrap it. We would figure out who wants to help design the wrap. And then we work with them because they do a huge print and then they slap it up, then they cut all those things out. And then if we were to do it that way, we wouldn't delay delivery. They're well polished in that. If we waited 60 days and then said, oh, we want to do this design, then that could delay delivery until that was all done.
And who's going to be the final decision maker on the design? You?
You don't want
Roy.
me.
That was
Yes,
part of my
right.
recommendation that
It's gonna
Crane
be
does
him
that.
going. I think
Who's
we
Crane?
would like to engage with Crane and ask them to.
Train,
support that.
Crane. Who is this that you're talking
Becca
about?
Sickbert,
I mean,
the
what does
creative-
Crane stand for? Is that the Manitou Collaborative of Art Recommendation
Alliance.
people?
yes. And
Are those the same people that chose the eagle in the little park on the east end of
that was
town?
the Arts Council. They were the same people who chose the mural for the side of Hiawatha Gardens.
Okay.
Okay. Look, council, it seems like the sentiment of council, we're gravitating towards the SV The 23, it's the 18 passenger vehicle, the enclosed version. And okay, and we're looking at two of them, I guess. Is that what Kelly, okay, so nods. Nancy, what's your thought?
Yeah, two of the enclosed SV, the 18-seater.
18-seater, okay. And I could live with that. John, you're on board? I mean, this isn't a formal vote. I just wanted to see if we want to have more discussion, if we're ready to move to a motion. Natalie?
Yep, but I would like to consider the conversation around Crane.
Wait,
and
I'm sorry, could you-
potentially budgeting
I'm sorry,
for-
could you speak a little more closely? to the mic?
Also, I would like to continue the conversation using Crane to support the wrap. And additionally, some funding then to pay the artist for their design work.
Okay, all right. And Julie, okay. Well, if we don't need any further discussion, I guess it's time to entertain a motion to go ahead and do this.
I move approval that we would purchase two of the SV 23 correctly spelled enclosed vehicles with the wrap that would be help facilitated with the design, and that we would also, allocate. Natalie, could you give me kind of a guesstimate of what?
I mean, they're not physically painting it, so they're
No, I
designing
know,
it
but
from
I mean,
home, so.
I understand that we want to compensate whoever
Right.
the artist is. What would you think that amount would be? $2,000 or
Yeah,
something like
definitely
that?
2,000.
So authorizing up to, so we have a total delivered price of 65,000. So with that artistic price, it would be 67,900 times two. That would be my motion.
Do we have a second?
Yes, I'm sorry.
You would have the design fee once and then it would be applied.
You're
to
right.
both.
You're right. So it only just would be $1,000 per vehicle. Right? So it'd be, so we're authorizing 66,900. Okay, total. And with $2,000 allocated for some kind of
Up to
artistic.
2,000.
Yes, exactly.
Because we could have the same design and probably want the same design on both vehicles.
That's
So
right.
they're only doing one design.
That's right. That's my point.
Okay, so we've got a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have motion is second. And this is for two vehicles. Two vehicles, the SV 23 enclosed. So let's, any further discussion? Nancy, did you have something you wanted to? Okay. No further discussion. Let's go ahead and vote.
John, sorry.
Sorry.
Do we want to talk about adding the air conditioning?
$4,000 vehicle. Or at least maybe the 4 cage fans.
I think.
I mean, that's
if you're gonna go in-
$550.
Yes, I think if you're gonna go enclosed, you would want to probably at least, but then the windows are also down in theory, but the fans would help. I can't tell you confidently how much the air conditioner would help. I gotta believe it's gonna help, but I can't, I don't know if it's gonna. Battery usage.
You know, the air conditioners are killer on batteries. Michelle?
Can we possibly do one with the air conditioning and then one with the fans?
Okay, so we've got a motion on the floor. John, would you take that as a friendly amendment? Or do you
Yes,
want-
why don't we try that? Maybe that's the one little variation we do is,
Okay, so I have a friendly amendment that we get one with air conditioning and then one with the 4 fans.
with the fans, right?
Thank you.
With the 2,000 allocation for the art component.
But do we need the fans for the driver area in addition to the AC? For the vehicle that has the AC, do they also need or is just the AC without the fans sufficient?
I feel like the driver has a fan on them already, and then they would benefit from the air conditioning as well.
Oh, so the fan is included already?
Well, there's a driver fan and then there's the 4 cage fans, which sit in the corners of the passenger area of the shuttle to help move air through there.
I just wasn't clear on whether the motion includes one vehicle with driver fan plus AC and the other vehicle with driver fan and no AC. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Both,
Is that what we're
Well,
talking?
I
is that
think the
what's on
motion, the
table?
friendly amendment that I agreed to is that one vehicle would have the $4,000 air conditioning package and the other would have the $550 4-cage fan package added.
Okay, Judith, I believe you were the seconder, so do you.
Well, yes, but can I ask one question about that, though? So my concern with the air conditioning is that, and because we want this to be successful, and I know it will, and I'm willing to certainly go with one of each, but my concern is how much battery that air conditioning is going to suck, and are we going to be taking that one vehicle out to be charged more often and handicapping the process? So, I mean, in my perfect world, I'd go with 2 vehicles with the fans and no air conditioning. Because once we get, I mean, we can't, well, anyway, that would be my recommendation. So if you could comment.
Judith,
on-
it will soak up battery,
Yeah.
okay? But when the air conditioning's off, it doesn't. And so to me, if it's an issue that we end up with a driver constantly running the air conditioning, it's called a fuse, and you kind of take that out, and guess what? It doesn't work anymore. So it wouldn't be, I wouldn't think that would be something that would be, if that's a problem, but I think it just might give us the variation we might maybe need. I don't know.
It's a good point. I think it's one of those things where if you needed it, you couldn't get to it. And if you don't need it, you just turn it off. I think it'd be a good experience for us to understand it as we are future and learning about these and investing in these. We might know better, in 5 years that we want to get a new one or whatever.
Then I'll confirm my second with the friendly amendment.
Okay, thank you. John, for the benefit of everyone, would you restate your motion before we vote?
So we're authorizing the purchase of 2 of these enclosed SV23s with a $2,000 additional allotment for artistic contribution. One comes equipped with the $4,000 air cooling package, and the other comes equipped with the 4-cage fans for $550.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, let's vote.
Seven to zero.
Okay, great. Go for it, guys. Thank you. All right, next item, resolution number 1423, a resolution terminating city council declaration of local disaster. This was in the council packet. Denise, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, this one is just taking our declaration, removing that, as I mentioned in the note that May 11th, I believe the federal government has removed the declaration of local disaster. So we no longer have COVID, sick time. We no longer have any of that due to the health department has removed it. So that's the purpose of this.
Great, thank you. Council, any questions? I think it's pretty straightforward. I think we're ready for a motion then. Nancy?
I move to approve resolution number 1423, resolution terminating city council declaration of a local disaster.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Okay, any further discussion? Let's vote.
Seven to zero in favor.
Okay, great. We've just ended this disaster then. It's much simpler than I thought it would be. Resolution number 1323, a resolution establishing an emergency and non-emergency remote participation policy for city council, boards, committees, and commission members. Okay, again, Denise, if you'd like to speak to this.
Yeah, so this resolution states that quasi judicial hearings can go ahead and be done remotely or in person, where our current code without an emergency declaration says it has to be done in person. So it allows that to occur. The other thing it also states is all executive sessions must be done in person and not remote.
I can add to that if you don't mind.
Yeah, please, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, no, right now you have 2 different policies for remote meetings.
Can you be a little closer to the mic?
Yeah.
We'll get you someday.
This thing here. So right now you have 2 different policies for remote meetings. One of them applies in non-emergency situations. The other one applies in emergency situations. What I did was combine the two because it got a little confusing. They're almost the same anyways. And so as Denise just mentioned, there is actually one difference, or there's two differences between what is allowed for remote meetings during an emergency versus a non-emergency. In an emergency, the new proposed policy does allow city council and boards and committees and commissions to hold executive sessions remotely, whereas in non-emergencies, that's not permitted. So it'd have to be an emergency for them to be able to use that special power. Also, your policy says that in non-emergencies, remote meetings are meant to be sort of periodic, not happening all the time. Whereas in emergencies, we just clarified that you can do it on more than a periodic basis as long as the emergency lasts. So those are the main differences between the two policies now. So I thought it was just more clear to just combine them into one. And the difference between the existing policy and this new policy is that it does allow quasi-judicial hearings in non-emergency situations, which seems to sort of be more the trend these days. The courts have even done it in a lot of cases. We had a concern in the past that there could be some due process issues if you're not here in person, you're not seeing the actual presentation visually. But remote technology is pretty good nowadays. You can kind of see most things, you can hear most things. So that's why it's now, at least the proposal is for it to now be permitted, even in non-emergency situations.
Good, thank you. I think that helps elucidate the matter. Council, any questions or comments? I think it's pretty straightforward. Sounds like it's time for a motion.
I move approval of resolution 1323.
We have a second?
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any further discussion? Let's vote.
Seven to zero in favor.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so now we're to council correspondence. Does anybody have anything? Julie?
I'd like to know, and I know the answer probably isn't available today, but I'd like to know what our policy limits are for police brutality cases through SURSA. Do you know that number off the top?
No,
of your head?
I don't.
Okay. If somebody could just let us know that, I'm interested in knowing that. Was that acceptable? I mean, I'm not supposed to direct staff. Should I do a SURSA Cora request, or is that a
No,
legitimate request?
I think it's a simple and reasonable request. So if
Okay.
staff could research that and get back to us.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, it's fine. Anything else? Judith?
I just wanted to give kudos to the community survey. I just filled it out and I really was impressed that it had some really detailed questions. I'm grateful that we had an opportunity to put in some input, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the results and seeing if we can affect policy changes accordingly. So thank you for that. That's all I've got.
Okay, great. Hang on, John. I think Michelle was next.
A resident reached out and said something about a cell phone tower up near the high school and was wondering if it could be like camouflaged on the panels.
Yeah, so I got a call. We were going to look at that and talk to the school. It is kind of just up on their roof, so.
I'll give a quick update. We have reached out to them and we've asked them, we've made a request to see if they could do some type of camouflage. So we've sent an official letter to them asking them to do such.
Great, thank you. John?
I think we had a pretty good session with the Ruxton meeting. My only comment is in going back over those materials, it seems like to me the community should be able to review the design of the first phase. It basically starts at the hydro plant and goes all the way down to wherever we were talking about that next, whatever, Winter Street or whatever it is. That area up there has got lots of automobiles, lots of buses, lots of over-the-road buses, okay? Lots of vehicles doing all sorts of irregular, weird turns, lots of pedestrian traffic. And I guess I just think that that is an important thing, that if that's going to be our first phase, that It's just not the cog that's calling the shots about what's happening up there. Okay, this is our community. This is our neighborhood. Okay, and I want to know where there are appropriate crosswalks, sidewalks, and accommodations for pedestrians that are up there. Right in the middle of that street is a storm sewer grate, okay, in which if you come down and you hit that thing with your bicycle, you're dead. Okay, that's been on C-Click Fix for now 2 years, and it's still not fixed. Okay. And so all of those amenities that are going on up there need to be thought through. Okay, there's currently lots of signage up there in terms of the Cog Railway, and I honor their property rights and whatnot, that they don't want hikers hiking through the parking lot. But I think we need to talk about all of that pedestrian stuff that's going on up there. Okay, and we kind of went through sort of a little hell and back when this council was first seated 4 years ago about whether we were going to have a transit stop up there. And if you all recall, we got a big threatening thing of no way in heck. And guess what? Now what's happening up there? And it's working pretty well. But I guess I want to make sure that that doesn't end up being just a discussion that happens between CSU and the COG. Okay, that's a community discussion, and that there's community review of what that design happens up there. Because I just have a sneaking suspicion that if we don't ask for that to happen, then bingo, taxpayers are going to fund something up there. Okay. And it may not be what the community wants. So that's just my comment about that first phase, because I look back over all those materials and that was MIA about that design that's going on up there. Okay, the maps just don't go further on up there. And when they do, they're really low resolution. You can't figure out what the design up there is. So that's my only comment about this Ruxton corridor design, is that we start this correctly, okay, with regard to Hydro Street, okay, and the pedestrian amenities, and that we think about as a community, what is it that we have going on up there? Is what we have going on up there is just kind of a free-for-all with the COG, and then we're just going to pay for it all and let them kind of design it? Or is that going to be part of the community involvement process? Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from council? Okay, let's go to city administration reports. Roy?
Yeah, just only the report for me is that we will be doing Park and Pine Ridge Streets paving next week. So we're starting with those first, and then we'll continue on with the paving process. So.
Okay, and I understand you'll be organizing a little parade or a festival or something when we get the trams in here.
Yes, we will have a parade.
Appreciate you volunteering to do that.
Yes, sir.
Great, thank you. Denise?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning the community survey. Encourage everybody that you can think of to fill that out. It is for residents only. If you say you're not a resident, then you can't move forward with it. So please encourage everybody to get that completed. And then I do want to mention the dumpster days this weekend that Roy oversaw was just a huge success. Filled those dumpsters up, and it was we'll be looking at doing another one in the I wouldn't say near future, but probably in the fall timeframe. The last thing I do want to mention is we're going around to different neighborhoods and we are still doing the chipping. So if you know somebody that wants to have, they have limbs that they are looking to have chipped, please go onto our website and they can see exactly when it's coming to their area and they can set that up for the chipping. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, that was everything we had on the agenda for tonight. So, oh, sure.
And maybe Counselor Johnson can confirm this. Is the chat with the chamber tomorrow from 4 to 6 p.m. at the chamber?
That's correct. And then the senior high school parade, they do those little car parades through town. That's at 6:30.
Okay, so the chat with the chamber at the Chamber of Commerce, 4 to 6 p.m. tomorrow to show you their interior and exterior remodel.
Denise?
As you can see, we started the remodeling here, so we're hoping to get it moving quickly and we're excited. So I wanted to mention that too.
Great. Thank you. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Second, motion is second. All in favor, say aye or vote. I guess we're voting electronically.
7-0.